Something's burning.
You wonder what it might be?
Hey, I'm not the police reporter.
But you call Twig, though, right? At least he's a columnist. He's paid to sit on his ass. What's your excuse? Just left him in the smoking lounge, hit him on his cell. What kind of people stand around watching a fire? Some shameful shit right here.
When you walk through the garden, gotta watch your back. Well, I beg your pardon. Walk the straight and narrow track. If you walk
Alex Cottrell and Toby Huntingford present Caught on the Wire. This podcast is an episode-by-episode analysis of HBO's widely acclaimed TV series about the city of Baltimore, its people, and its many problems. Find more information about the show and all the episodes online at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com.
Hello there, I'm Toby. You're listening to Caught on the Wire. I'm with Alex Cottrell today as always, and we're now arriving at a new frontier, the final season of The Wire, the media season. This one, I guess, is perhaps one of the most famous, definitely the most divisive. In my mind, it's a very good season that sort of, it can match shoulders with the giants of season 4 and season 3 in some ways. But I'm glad that we've got the opportunity to really discuss it for the next 10 weeks and really work out, I think, for ourselves whether it does sort of stack up to how we remember it as a great season. I don't know if you echo those viewpoints, Alex.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching and analysing Season 5, because when I think back on the first few times that I've watched it, whatever it is, 3 or 4 times that I've seen it now, I do have kind of fond memories of it, and I know that people are very critical about Season 5, and I've never felt those criticisms as strongly, but I do feel that given the way in which we've been watching and analysing the episodes so far, in 4 seasons, I think that it will be revealing. I think this process will be very revealing of Season 5, and its true strengths and weaknesses will be made known to us, or at least our personal views on their strengths and weaknesses. So I think it's going to be very intriguing because of how divisive it is as a show, and whether or not we are going to be able to rationalise some decisions and completely bemoan other decisions that may have been made creatively.
I think so, yeah. I mean, even watching the first episode, there were a number of things that I was like, this is really great. A number of things that I was like, yeah, I can totally get behind some of these criticisms that are commonly thrown at Season 5. Obviously, we aren't anywhere near, we're kind of close, but we haven't got into the whole fabricated serial killer plot, which is probably the most divisive aspect of Season 5, but that's all for next week. Certainly looking forward to jumping in at this point. We're now in 2008 in terms of the Wire chronology. So we've come a long way from 2002, and I think each season is very much set within the year it broadcast. So this season started broadcasting on the 6th of January 2008. And I guess obviously we left our characters back in season 4 practically on the cusp of New Year's Day 2007. So we've moved on, I think it's about 15 months. As Bubs mentions, next week he's been clean for that amount of time. And we have to assume that was his bottom, and now he's been clean ever since. And that will put us in March of 2008. So that's where we're going to dive off from.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. That's the one thing that The Wire never does too much of. It never tries to define much about chronology or mention common current affairs apart from sort of 9/11 and stuff like that. But I think if you watch closely enough, you can sort of pin down when each season happens and how long each season takes.
Oh yeah, it's not an ignored aspect. It's
no,
they still do it. There's still that chronology and that time passing, and you can find it through little tidbits being put out by the characters, or like you say, the newspaper headlines that you see in season 5 have the date on them. Obviously, what with newspapers being such a focal point of this season, it's just a big giveaway.
That's one of the really cool things. Definitely, because you can actually pause the show. I'm sure, particularly if you've got the HD version of the show, you can give it a pause and read every word on the page, because we get to see a lot of newspaper articles this season, and that really adds a bit of depth to this season, certainly.
We also have to be
I mean,
aware when we're looking at this season in terms of how we're perceiving its weaknesses. It's worth remembering that this is our concluding season. It has to achieve quite a lot, and it's trying to do it in a condensed version. It is very much limited by these 10 episodes rather than season 4's 13. It does definitely make a difference having that extra 3 hours of runtime to play with in order to just the overall sense of pace in all of your arcs. And obviously they introduce, for example, the fake serial killer story, and that comes in our second episode quite promptly. So
yeah, it deserved another 2 or 3 episodes of really settling in before they want to throw that sort of thing at us. And it's those sort of things that you can really feel the time constraints when those things happen. I'm aware that I think David Simon did ask for 12 hours to finish off The Wire. HBO weren't willing to go there, and I believe they offered him 9 or 10, and he eventually was able to push it to 10.5, since the final episode is a full 90-minute feature length. So it's not too far behind what seasons 2 and 3 established with their 12 hours, but it's amazing what an hour and a half less can really do in terms of allowing you to fully fledge the story and give all the characters the time that you want to give. So, as you say, you can definitely feel that the difference with the time constraints that were put on this season.
We were also discussing just before we were recording, actually, we were discussing the change in box art and sort of general imagery for season 5, and also, I suppose, we have our change in themes that we've already mentioned. There's also the different titles that we have, the opening credits, the new theme. So do you want to touch on any of these before we start our recap?
Yeah, well, you were just saying, because obviously you've had to change our logo, haven't you? Because the theme for this season is the colour black, which doesn't really show up well with the typeface that you've got. So we had to whiten it up, and we were just wondering if that was sort of the best move in terms of giving each DVD, because I've got the DVD set staring at me now, and it's quite a nice little feature. But clearly, the DVD cases for seasons 3 and 4 are the outright winners. They've certainly got the coolest artwork on them. They
have those highly stylized photos on the front, don't they? Whereas season 2 is more like a silhouette, I think.
Yeah, it looks either like Prez or McNulty, or a combination of the below, sort of just generically listening to a wire through a pair of headphones, which we never see a character doing on the show. So I'm not sure it's the most well judged DVD picture. And then season 1, we just have a sort of standard collection of some of our characters on each side of the lore. Yeah. It's not a bad one at all, really. So yeah, it's a good bunch of DVDs. I think that the Blu-rays probably changed that. I haven't actually seen the full inside packaging of the Blu-ray box set.
Season 3 wins it for me, with the reflections, sort of the glances across. It's really nice. That passing moment.
Very cool.
So yeah, season 5 is that sort of white on black. I feel like it would have been better as black on white, like a newspaper, having that really stark, high contrast thing, as opposed to the black and white, because it's a bit of an odd choice to go from when you started with grey, and then, I don't know, you kind of have a myriad of colours, and they don't seem as strongly related as our final one, having that sort of contrast, as though it's like type, as though it's like the media itself, black on white, these opposing views. There's obviously the element of race, black and white, it feels like it's making a bit more of a connection to its imagery than the other seasons. I mean, maybe you could throw up some tenuous connections for 2, 3, and 4 with their particular colours.
I mean, they all feel, because you associate the DVD cover with the season every time you get it out, you kind of feel like they all link up, but there's not really any actual connections I could link.
Their link is based on familiarity rather than...
Exactly. It's a bit like an album cover. When you listen to an album, you think of that colour. But I don't think there's meant to be any real links. I mean, obviously the red one with season 4 is the most striking, and also perhaps the most dangerous and alarming, which matches up with the season, I guess. But
that's I suppose there's I suppose you can make kind of connections to the mood in some way, but I mean, if say 2 and 3 were swapped around, then you could say something like, "Oh, well, it's the port/docks season,
blue is
so
the water."
blue is the water." Yeah. But I mean, so it makes me
It's all a
feel like there's
muchness.
not a lot to really look at there. We're not going to find much there.
No, it also means there's no end to the analysis we can possibly dig out as well. So it certainly.
That's what Caught on the Wire is. It's just dredging every last bit that we can from the show, and just really looking at everything, making it an anthology of is anthologic? Is that a word?
I'm sure it sounds like it should be. You can normally do that with most ologies, so
I'm Googling it as we speak.
we'll go with it.
What about the season 5 title credits?
I think they're the best of the bunch. They've obviously had the most time to refine the style they're going for here, and I think they use imagery that they've used starting from season 1, as well as smattering about half of it with the new season imagery. So it goes all the way back to season 1, includes bits from 2, 3, and 4. It also helps that I really like this theme. This is probably my second favourite after like the Blind Boys of Alabama one in season 1. And then of course the Tom Waits comes afterwards, and I think 3 and 4 are the weakest in terms of the song. But I really like the cutting, and it shows us a nice overview of the season as a whole. I think the thing that you lose once you've watched the show once is that when you first watch the credits, particularly the season 1 credits, you wonder, it's just a massive mishmash of images. And when you watch each episode, you begin to realise how the opening credits actually tells a story.
Yeah.
And particularly with the things like when you see the wiretap oscillations and stuff like that, you begin to realise what that all means. You get to see the GPS trackings of various things in season 2, and it all starts to mesh together into a big case. And once you've discovered that once, you can't really discover it again. So I think the title credits do lose a bit of meaning once you've seen it once. But I remember that being a really cool thing about the show when I first went through it.
In that sense, for season 1, those title credits became like a teaser. Every episode opened with a bit of a teaser on what you could expect from the show, even though you may not have realised it at the time.
Yeah.
But then when you, like you say, when you see that for the other episode, it doesn't work as strongly because you now realise what you're looking at.
Yeah, you've made the discovery already, and it's a bit like an alternate way of doing next time on. Like it's almost a slightly better way of doing it. But I mean, what did you think of this season's opening?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's the best title sequence. They really honed the theming of it. Obviously, we have lots of media imagery and sightings of the new spots that we visit, like the newsroom and the homeless camp, and under the bridge there. But there's a lot more obvious emphasis on the interconnectedness of the images that we're seeing and how it, relates to this all the pieces matter idea. It's not just a collage of Baltimore scenes. It is emphasizing that they're connected. So, there's the car blowing up. There's like Omar blowing up that car, and then there's the black cloud over the city skyline, and kind of the impact that it has there. And there's like cuts between the newsroom and police-related things where it's talking about the themes of, being restricted or having a certain limitation placed on them. It's actually trying to really make a lot of emphasis on these the relationships between all the elements we're seeing, which is brilliant. They've really got it down.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a nice couple of allusions to the homelessness as well, which is a very important sort of humanitarian issue that is key to this season. In the same way that prostitution was kind of an underlying humanitarian issue in season 2, homelessness sort of occupies that role this time around. The other 3 seasons don't seem to have a particular issue that kind of underlies the story in the same way.
Well, there is a general kind of, there is a general humanitarian slant, if you like, towards just the dope fiends in general. I mean, they're almost portrayed a bit like The Walking Dead. I mean, the way they like shamble around and sort of, sometimes you do feel like the imagery that they're trying to create, especially when the kids are talking about the zombie master, Chris. It is very much like creating this idea of seeing these people shambling around town as though they're literally just, waiting to die. They're just taking of these, taking this drug and using it as their sort of racetrack to the grave.
I guess they're called fiends for a reason, because over here, fiend certainly just refers to like a Halloween ghoul or Dracula or whatever, doesn't it, really? So, all of it matches up quite well. So certainly good to discuss a few things heading into Season 5. Just touching on the timeline thing, I think it's worth just establishing the proper timeline from what I remember. I think basically each gap between the season expands by about 6 months. So Season 1 to Season 2, 6 month gap between the summer of 2002 and the winter of 2003. And then between 2 and 3, it's like about a year. So from summer 03 to summer 04. And Season 4 obviously picks up about 2 years later, summer 06, and takes us to winter of 06. And then Season 5 picks up just about 15 months later, March 08. So, it's sort of expanding by about 6 months each time, and we're moving on nearly 2 years from Season 4. So a lot has had the chance to change as we go into this new season.
Yeah, good look at the gaps between our seasons there, kind of putting them in context. And like you say, we end up in Season 5 in the same year that the show is being released. So it kind of brings us up to the present day with the show. Because I think we've mentioned before how the Wire, although it comes out, obviously it comes out on TV originally in 2002, it does feel like it's trying to portray a certain era of the street and of the police world that's a few years before that, especially with the pages and whatnot.
Without drawing too much sort of overt attention to what was going on during that time. It's just kind of more of a general feel, isn't it? Certainly. And I'm sure it won't be too long before they can really sort of nail the fashions of the show down to that particular era of the early noughties. Also really, really great. I mean, not sure how much they could have predicted this, but knowing the intelligence of the team behind it, the show obviously starts in the first few days of January of the year that the global financial crisis begins, and the whole season is very much fueled by this loss of money. No one's got any money. The economy's run. Baltimore's economy is on the toilet, and I thought that was just a fantastic sort of synergy between what was really going on in the world and the Wire sort of predicting that in a very almost psychic way. So thought that was really, really cool.
Right, so we've got quite a lot of episode to be getting through. There's some fairly major sections to be looking at. So did you want to dive into our recap now?
Yeah, take us through, sir.
He's got the fire and the fury.
So for Season 5, Episode 1, we've not actually mentioned the title yet, More with Less, and it's called.
That's the one.
We're looking at a fairly wide-spanning first episode. It's covering quite a lot of ground, and there's an awful lot of overlap already. Normally, we find with our episodes that we start with some clear strands, and they are slowly woven together over the course of the series. Whereas here in Season 5, I think obviously where we establish ourselves in the story, and if you've come this far, then you know what to expect from The Wire. There is that interwoven idea straight from the off, I think. So there's a lot of combining of strands. So we're looking at a brief introduction with Homicide. Then we look at the Stanfield organisation, which covers obviously the Stanfield organisation itself, but also the unit following them, so the major case unit with them. And we see the work of people like Michael, who is obviously now a member of the Stanfield organisation. We're looking at his actions now as well. He almost becomes... he almost takes over from Bodhi as our eye on the corner, I would say.
Oh, yeah. No doubt he sort of fills that role now, doesn't he?
So that's the Stanfield organisation. Then we take a look at the Western District, which is a bit shorter. And And then we're looking at the politics, which is very wide and includes some of the top-level police people, as usual. And we're looking at major crimes. That's more specifically just what's going on with them kind of after they find out what their fate is, politically speaking.
Right, yeah.
And then, of course, we have our brand new setting, the Baltimore Sun, which is a bit more insular because obviously we're introducing ourselves to it in isolation so that we can get used to all these new characters and whatnot. And finally, we have Bubbles.
Okay. So holding Omar back as always at the start of these seasons.
Yeah.
But yeah, most of the team is there, and obviously our final institution to meet in the show will be introduced to us in a fairly easy way.
So let's kick off with Homicide, as the episode does. And this is literally just the opening scene for Homicide, because this is the only time we spend with them sort of exclusively. So Bunk interviews Deshaun Fredericks, who is a suspect in the murder of someone named Pookie. Bunk and his colleagues, which includes Ed Norris and Michael Crutchfield, and their supervisor, Sergeant Landsman, they manipulate Fredericks into thinking his accomplice Monel is cooperating with them, and eventually into confessing. Bunk and his colleagues demonstrate their techniques in manipulating a suspect to a junior detective in the unit, and Bunk claims that their most ambitious lies are the most readily believed. So our opening scene and kind of the introduction to the sort of principal theme in the show as a whole in season 5.
Yeah, it opens up on a note that almost makes us think Bunk is narrating the episode to us. It's this really weird, very frontal, you see now, I'm telling you. And it's just kind of this very interesting way of opening up the show anyway. And a good minute of Bunk close-up here, right on the face. So I'm sure he was very honoured to be able to open the season like this, the final season, Wendell Pierce.
Yeah, I think it's great that they chose to have this emphasis on him at the beginning, and because we know that Bunk always does go to tell those lies such as they are in order to guilt people, in order to kind of push people over some edge using that information against them. We've seen that he's very good as a detective at that sort of thing, so he is an appropriate person to kick the season off, I think.
Yeah, oh, definitely. It's a very good scene.
So he's giving that big lie right from the off.
Oh yeah, I think possibly the most obvious of the season opening metaphor, because obviously we've been through how each opening scene is fairly unrelated to the rest of the plot, but provides that big overarching metaphor for the season itself, and this one seems to make the point most bluntly, particularly with Bunk's epigraph line, doing a lot of the talking there, and Norris's comment about sort of the Americans in general. I mean,
that's really on the nose, that one.
Yeah.
That one's a bit almost I understand kind of Norris's character he is sort of outwardly mocking of people in that way. Oh, I love this fucking town, He is kind of that sort of guy.
All based obviously on the fact that he was kind of quite a high-ranking political figure, really, as the commissioner.
Yeah.
There's a lot of irony to the way they do his character.
Yeah,
try and
he's
make
meant
him
to be sort of outrageously outspoken as, how alarming it must be for people who know what standing he has in the real world.
I know.
So,
yeah, that's certainly the cool aspect of what they've done with his character, definitely.
Like having the real governor of Maryland be the security guard at the door saying, "The governor will see you now."
Yeah. It must be so funny if you actually know of these politicians. Imagine seeing David Cameron, sending you into David Cameron's office. It would just be a hilarious moment. So
he wouldn't be good at it, though. Maybe he would. Would Cameron be good?
I think he could do the security guard line pretty convincingly. It's nothing too taxing.
I don't know. I don't know if he'd be able to bring it when it comes to the acting. Maybe he could.
We'll have to. I'm not sure we'll ever find out, to be honest, but I'll give him the benefit of the doubt.
Didn't Tony Blair do comic relief one year?
You may.
And I think he was pretty. I recall him.
Line.
I mean, I'm not a fan of Blair, but I remember him being surprisingly good in it. So it can be done. Not all British politicians have to be really sort of stiff and uptight and a bit depressing.
Yeah, a lot of politics is acting, I guess, so it can't be too far removed. But yeah,
I digress. So yeah, we do get this big message straight from the off about you are being lied to, message that kind of gets us straight off. And we get it again in the scene after it when we have McNulty and Dozeman on the roof. Obviously, we'll talk about that in a minute. But it does give it to us again.
Yeah. And
it's also worth mentioning that Monel, the kid that they mentioned who is supposedly grassing him up but isn't really, he's actually one of the kids that asked Randy to stand watch outside the bathroom back in season 4.
Oh, yeah.
That Monel. Same kid.
That's really cool. I've never made that connection.
Yeah, it's a really nice little connection to season 4, straight up from the off.
Again, totally feasible. Like they could totally be the same character.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just necessarily recycling of actors. Like that's certainly very good. Just overall, a pretty mean way of manipulating things here from the detectives. It reminded me perhaps most closely of the D'Angelo interrogation in early season 1, in the way that McNulty and Bunk completely manipulate D'Angelo into writing that letter by making up all sorts of lies about William Gant. So, it certainly adds that moral complexity to things, as most of the scenes do. But it does begin to get pretty hilarious once we step over to that printer, particularly when they get the gaffer tape going and the very serious landsman like really staring into the screen of the printing. Like,
we ready, Professor?
It is pretty hilarious.
So
actually.
good.
I have to chuckle.
It's the idea of landsman as a professor. Yeah, they really do sell it, which is fantastic.
The machine tells the tale, son. Yeah. So.
The machine is never
dear.
wrong, son.
Oh dear. The gullibility. And of course we also meet a new young detective who seems to have taken McNulty's desk.
Yes, that does not go
whose
down
name I
too
don't
well.
know, but yeah. And that's all I've got to say really. Obviously we then bring on the new credits.
Yeah, which I guess we've already discussed.
I know we haven't tackled Mr. Sam Wiles's big question, but
yes, season 5 theme. Well, I suppose
season 5 theme,
now's
just,
as good a time as
music
any.
theme. Yeah.
So what do you think of the season 5 theme in relation to all the others?
In terms of just the musicality, I mean, yeah, it's my second favourite. I think Blind Boys of Alabama has the most character for me, and that's kind of the whole theme of The Wire itself. You know what I mean? That is the official theme in many ways, and they reuse it again in the final montage just to underline that. So it's the one that sort of characterises the show best for me. Really like the way this one's done, though. It's not particularly melodic, but it kind of has a nice beat to it behind. And yeah, tragically, the original Tom Waits version is in third place for me.
Yeah, I do.
Just not.
I do rather favour the original Tom Waits one, but I do like season 5 as well. It has a kind of, can't quite put my finger on it. It has a clean and almost sort of tight, sterile feel to it that I kind of associate with like white collar workers reading newspapers and that kind of like world on top of the street and things like that. I don't know. I'm just riffing on it here, but I quite like it for those reasons. It does stand out. It doesn't really have that same kind of folky soulfulness to it that the other ones tend to. There's something so candid about the season 4 one where it's just those kids singing that song. There's just something really, really candid about it, and I do very much like that for it. But season 2 one takes it for me just as a great musical performance.
Oh yeah, certainly a very commonly held opinion. I mean, the original should be the best in many ways. So yeah,
right.
And I think Sam did ask us about the lyrics as well, but obviously we might have to save that for another day.
Yeah, no, I think that's a bit too much to be taken on. All right, out of an episode such as this. Right, well, let's look at the Stanfield organisation then. This actually starts off with those watching the Watchers, as it were. So Greggs and Sidner watch as Marlowe's guards prepare one of the drug dealers he supplies for a meeting. The guards confiscate the dealer's electronic equipment, including his phone and music player, and the detectives are impressed with Stanfield's thoroughness and remain too far removed to hear the content of the discussion, however. McNulty and Dozeman observe Stanfield's courtyard from a rooftop. The dealer they see tries to negotiate a more favourable split with Stanfield because he is unable to pay his workers. Stanfield refuses to negotiate and retains the 60 to 40% split already in place, with a threat of violence from Chris, Snoop, and his other enforcers. O-Dog then ushers the dealer away, and Stanfield next relays a message to a runner to organise a meeting with Chris. The runner passes the message on to a moped rider, and the unit follows the moped to Chris, who is, whilst using alternating surveillance from Sidner and Greggs in a van and Freeman in a car. After conferring with the messenger, Chris sends Michael to check on his corner. The detectives tail Chris to his meeting with Stanfield, and McNulty declines to follow Marlowe as they already know where he's going. At the meeting, Stanfield tells Chris that his negotiation was successful and that his enforcers will not need to act against the dealer. They talk about the continued surveillance, and Stanfield spots Sidner and Greg's van. He also tells Partlow that their lookout saw McNulty climb onto the roof of a building earlier that day. After the meeting, Freeman suggests continuing the surveillance, but Gregg suggests they should call it a day, as they are not even being paid for their overtime. There's a big section to open up there, which literally just consists of Marlowe going to a meeting, confirming to Chris what happened at the meeting, and then talking about the fact that they're being followed, and we're seeing that from their perspective and from the perspective of the people tailing them, which is obviously the detail.
Yeah. And
so it's all in the details. This is why I kind of combined it all together, because it's quite a simple story, but it's all about the details and the conversations that these characters are having. So I kind of had to boil it down to the conversations in that one.
Yeah, and what a nice set of scenes it is, and it does tell a lovely story. We're back to a bit of physical investigation work, which brings us some excitement. We haven't had many opportunities to experience that in Season 4, with all the MCU being reduced to nothingness with Herc and just bullshit. So, good seeing all the characters back in their old roles. Sidner, Greggs, Freeman, McNulty, all on the major crimes hunt. Interesting to see how Greggs is back after obviously seeming to commit to homicide at the end of last season. She must have dragged herself back in, which does feel consistent. I can really imagine Greggs being lured back into this environment, which seems to suit her well. So yeah, just a good bunch of scenes, and very routine. Seeing lots of, very much visual exposition, I guess is the best way of putting it. They're trying to make it clear that this has been a very long established set of motions that both the Stanfield and the Stanfield investigation go through sort of on a daily basis. And it never really goes anywhere because Marlowe, remains too cautious to let them get on top of him. So
yeah, we really do get some bread and butter detail work to start off after the titles, which is nice. We get McNulty also continuing the theme from our opening scene with Bunk, where he says to Dozeman, "Oh, you believe everything you read." So it's kind of just continuing that theme in a different place.
Yeah, really, really nice detail. Definitely.
We also, it's nice that we have Dozeman complaining about a lack of pay right alongside this dealer who can't pay his workers. So it's like everyone's having to deal with these financial limitations, and it's showing it on all these different sides of the street. Yeah,
the title of this episode is completely embodied by like every scene.
Oh yeah,
this episode.
They go full. I guess they really go hard on this theme.
Definitely the recessionary theme of 2008. So it's all very good. And yeah, just obviously the closest we get to exposition, I guess, is when Greg says, every day the same shit, just making it clear that for perhaps even a year or so now, they've just been sitting on Marlowe trying to find a way to break the investigation a little bit further. But the discipline that Marlowe is maintaining, the strict routine, despite the fact he knows the police are watching him, is just infallible. And you can kind of see that the operation is becoming stale for a lot of people, and that Freeman's perhaps the only one that's motivated to continue.
Yeah, it's interesting that they should be hoping for a case like this to get back up on Marlowe Stanfield and really be getting out there, hitting the streets. That's kind of what they really hoped for. Now they've got it, and they're probably not too pleased about it because they've got themselves stuck in a bit of a rut, and they've essentially become a deterrent. They talk about it later on. They essentially have stopped really investigating them and are just there to sort of watch them and make sure they don't do anything wrong. They're literally just there as a deterrent for the Stanfield organisation now.
Yeah,
So like you say, that has become stale for them.
certainly. Yeah. I certainly enjoyed the Dozeman McNulty stuff, as you mentioned. I like how McNulty's quite smug and withdrawn and quite proud to be sort of heralded in this way, almost celebrated for his epic actions back in season 2. But he, of course, maintains that modesty, and as you say, gives him a great comeback, which feeds in really nicely with the overall theme. And Bunk's epigraph of this season, that because people believe so much, are so quick to believe things that nothing can actually ever change. So, yep, really, really nice set of scenes.
All right, so shall we move on
anything else
to
about
the next bit then? Seeing as we've got a few to get through for the Stanfield organisation.
That is true, yeah. I don't know if there's anything else to say. Did you think that the colour palette had changed this season? Did it feel different to you? It always, season 5 particularly always feels a bit different for me. But
Well, you mean like more vibrant? More
it
variance?
almost gets colder. It gets a little bit more washed out, I think. If anything.
I've not really thought about it. I've not really noticed a difference, to be honest. Maybe I'll have to go back and have another look. Maybe it is.
Yeah. So I did think it was quite cool to see McNasty as well as one of the key bits of graffiti around Marlowe's hideout now, which seems to have developed a little sort of culture around the graffiti that's been put there since season 4. But yeah, otherwise I don't think I've got too much to add really, apart from obviously the train coming back when Marlowe and Chris meet in the field later on.
That's right, yeah.
That ominous slow train.
Right, so the next bit that we have here, back at the unit office, Freeman suggests that Stanfield's people may become lazy as they are reusing meeting places, and that they will have a case against them eventually despite their precautions. Lester suggests going to a bar, and Greggs complains that she can't afford it, but agrees when he offers to pay. And we have Lieutenant Asher continuing to work on his beach house and states that he is out of the loop when it comes to the pay issues. At the bar, McNulty complains that he was happy in patrol and that he was lured back to the major case unit with false promises of a new day for the department. Freeman complains that the interdepartmental politics prevented him from building a case against Stanfield when he was still using cell phones. Bunk later arrives and he's facing the same problem with pay as the rest of the detectives. So like you say, Freeman really is now perhaps the remaining person with the energy and drive to keep going at this investigation in the same way, just waiting for that payoff. He's pretty used to dealing with very long periods of time, slow progress, and finally getting to that light at the end of the tunnel, so he's willing to go the extra mile for it, it looks like.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Everyone does seem fairly disillusioned here. It seems to be half based on the money and half based on the lack of progress. But then again, everyone is pretty disappointed when Daniels shuts the case down at the end of the episode. So I think they do still hold it dear to some extent. I mean, if you've worked on it for more than a year, you must be frustrated. I mean, it's clearly a massive, amount of knowledge to build up to suddenly have destroyed, as has been the case a number of times.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
But very cool conversation. It's quite a nice gag from Dozeman where he uses the word overtime wordplay quite nicely. There's obviously a little bit with Asher as well, Lieutenant Asher.
Yes, we see the appearance of his beach house almost for real. He has like a model of it, doesn't he?
And consider it's been 2 years. It's still kind of a vision. I mean, obviously it's in miniature now, so it looks like Freeman might have whipped him up a dollhouse miniature version.
Yeah, I was thinking the same. Like maybe he got Freeman to make some bits and pieces for it.
But he sounded like he was on the cusp of moving in back in 2006, and here we are 2 years later, and it's still this pipe dream of retirement, really. And
maybe that's the joke.
He's such exactly. It's just an embodiment of that Freeman wisdom. Work and enjoyment. It's the stuff that happens while you're waiting for moments that never come. He's rather than looking at his work, he's constantly focusing on what happens after his work and missing the whole point of his career. So it's this kind of ongoing joke with him, and they find a nice moment to again plug the whole beach house joke just for our enjoyment.
Yeah, that's a really good connection to what Freeman says about a life, Jimmy.
Yeah. I think it works very well on that front. And of course, they always use Greg's as their sweet talker for Asher. She always pops over and gets him to sign all the papers, and obviously gives him a few nice comments about his beach house, and off he goes and enjoys his little bubble world again. So,
and he's right, is Lester as well. That's quite a poignant kind of line from the show, I feel. That it is true that you can't spend your life kind of looking about what will happen after all this time that you've spent. You know, you've got to be doing something now that you actually really want to do. You've got to do your best to try and pursue something like that, rather than wishing 40 hours plus of a week of your life away.
Oh, certainly, yeah. It's a really nice reminder of what he said, and you can guarantee after all this hype and all this time, the actual reality of the beach house, if it ever does materialise, will never be up to the standards of his expectations. So it's it's a good lesson that we can apply to some of the previous stuff.
Of course, we also get into the bar itself, and based on how much time has presumably passed, McNulty having got very deep into this unit and very involved. As we know, McNulty plus investigation equals a lot of drinking. So we see here McNulty stumbling both literally and figuratively here. As it's been sort of a year or so since the bodies came out of the vacants, and in that time we are to assume, like I say, that Jimmy's gone straight back down his rabbit hole, and that he's just straight back on the drink again as though nothing had happened.
Yeah, really painful to see him slip like this, really slip bad as well, like to almost lower than he ever was back in the other seasons. And
well, I don't know, he gets pretty bad.
Season 2, I believe, is a real low. I will certainly agree with you. But he's certainly very wobbly here.
He goes very far in season 5. There's no doubt about it, and it doesn't start well.
Yeah,
it doesn't start well for McNulty.
No, it's everything is destroyed from what we saw of season 4, and you know he's speaking the truth. He's saying it as it is about the department and the new day, Jimmy. You could either celebrate him and congratulate him for that, or tell him he's stupid because you bought into the lie yet again. Have you not learned how it works now?
Yeah.
So you could look at it either way.
The bigger the lie as well.
Yeah.
Especially with perhaps that's true with Jimmy too, as well. And the whole no second chapters in American Lies, David Simon talking about that, you know.
Yeah, and he's no longer the wheelman as he was last season. So I did like the way they set up that wheelman joke as well with the robbing the liquor store.
Yeah, I thought that was a really nice part of that conversation where they're talking about the police officers talking about robbing a liquor store. Classic Wire.
I think that's probably it, really, isn't it, for that section?
Yeah, we just kind of have the return to the bar, and Bunk arrives, and we see them trying to pay with those overtime slips.
Yeah.
Which is also quite amusing.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Right, so let's move on to the next bit then. So we have Michael visiting his corner, and he finds that his crew, which includes Spider, Marcus, and Kennard, he finds that they will not report their count to Dookie, who is supposed to be in charge. Michael sends Dookie to their home to meet Bug from school. Spider tells Michael that their count is fine and that they have no respect for Dookie. Back at home, Michael plays Connect 4 with Bug and discusses paying Dookie to look after Bug rather than working with his crew. The next day, Stanfield stages a liaison with a woman at a hotel and fools the detectives into following him. Chris instructs the woman to wait in a room while Stanfield attends a meeting with the co-op. The co-op discusses problems with the redevelopment of East Baltimore by Johns Hopkins moving the ghetto areas out into the county. Stanfield suggests that the territory should belong to whoever claims it, but Pop Joe says that the new territory should be reserved for those who are losing trade in East Baltimore. Stanfield antagonizes Joe, pointing out that he will stand to gain, and asks if he will assign one of his lieutenants to develop the new territory instead, offering Slim Charles a job working the new territory for the Stanfield organization as well, which he declines. So here we have, out on the street, Michael with his crew, at home with Dookie, and then we have Marlowe's arrival at the co-op meeting.
Yeah. the best indication of how much time has passed as well. I mean, Dookie is suddenly a grown-up, and he's looking healthy. He's like put on a lot of weight, and clearly knowing and living with Michael and having a bit of a paycheck behind him has kept him in many ways better than he was keeping last season. So it's nice to see that development.
Yeah,
Michael hasn't really
Dookie
changed.
is looking a lot cleaner and healthier, but he's not looking happier.
No.
And like you say,
Interesting how
Michael's not
Michael
really
hasn't-
changed, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. He's just the same dude. And nor has Kennard changed. You'd have thought Kennard might have had a bit of a growth spurt, but it really shows you how young he was back in season 4. Like, he's still a little boy now, complete kid.
Yeah.
So, yeah, tragic to see how he's got no respect from the crew still. Like, you'd have thought 2 years of trying to work on this corner, because we saw him doing the same thing back in 06, and, like, there's just not an ounce of respect has been gained. Even though he's sort of developed from social promotion, he's actually been promoted by Michael to the crew chief in his absence.
That's right, yeah.
So
I don't think it comes as a big surprise, because Dookie's not really got that air of authority or sort of the potential to snap or defend himself if necessary in these situations. He doesn't have that hard man attitude that I think one needs in that environment when you look at someone like Spider or Michael. So I think they just don't, they don't get that from Dookie, and thus they don't respect him, and thus they don't really involve him. And I can't see Dookie suddenly becoming like them.
I certainly couldn't argue with that. He's just lucky that he's got that childhood link with Michael, and Michael really does maintain his loyalty. He's in it for the long haul with those that his friends and those that he's loyal to, which is a really admirable aspect of his character, certainly.
And speaking of loyalty, it definitely lies with the Stanfield organisation now, as he seems to have taken on this, very rounded role with them. He's got a very close relationship with them. It's that's where his loyalties definitely seem to lie now, and he's in keeping things enforced down at that corner with someone like Spider, who is it seems is a much more experienced person on the street than Michael is, and yet Michael is the one commanding authority here. Yeah.
Spider's always had the air of being very hardened, doesn't he, as far as the street characters go. Of course, very comfortable home life now, shown very much by the money he's got rolling in, and Dookie is benefiting from it as well. We've got the huge TV set that he's got, and obviously a nice speaker system back at home, and living a pretty comfortable life here, really. And despite these home comforts, Dookie's not really built for the drug game, and he's not able to get any other job. He's just in the ghetto as a lot of the rest. And nannying is the other job he might be able to do, which is floated and seems like a logical idea. So
it's interesting that he offers this extra time to Dookie as like, do with it what you will. It's your time is your own, and that almost seems like a dreaded thing for Dookie. He doesn't seem to be looking forward to that prospect at all, as if he knows that being left with that time to himself is not good for him. He knows that's not going to be conducive of a positive lifestyle for him. That's
very much actively going to, draw him towards the bubbles that he will become, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think in a strange way, he sort of knows it. He does kind of sense that here. You really can tell that how much he's not looking forward to that.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, both Bug and Dookie really tight with Michael here, and he lets Bug win at Connect 4, which is cool. And you see that, quite likely that the Stanfield training has really, really cemented that idea of loyalty, that you have to stick by your people. And that could be one of the few positive applications of what he learns, really, with the Stanfields, seen in action here.
Yep.
And we immediately cut from this pretty nice, evening with Michael, Dookie and Bug straight to McNulty on the other volatile edge of life, suffering worse than he was for a long time. So quite like that sort of contrast they show.
So after the... do you think there's anything to be said for the game of Connect 4 that's going on with Michael and Bug?
No, it's just nice to see obviously it's the "you got me," which is all sorts of meanings on the street. But it's just nice to see Michael let Bug win and give Bug the tips. You know, he's really training Bug up. He really is the guardian here, and the game allows him to demonstrate that.
Well, I was going to say that it reminded me of how, because of Michael's kind of new change and the loyalty that he now has to the Stanfield organisation, it reminded me of how unusual it was to see Chris being quite sort of magnanimous and comforting and almost friendly towards Michael when they had that meeting before about, you know, if you're with us, you're with us. And that seems strange because you know Chris as being like this, you know, sort of cold killer. And now one gets that air with Michael now in this scene with Bug, is that it's somewhat slightly uncharacteristic to see him so off guard and just having a good time with Bug. Especially when I get the impression near the end of season 4, at the time I got more of an impression that he was slipping away from that and just leaving that responsibility to Dookie, and I'll let him deal with that. I can focus on, you know, being myself with the Stanfield organisation, knowing who I am on the street.
Yeah, it's odd, isn't it? It's very much separated those two aspects of his life by the looks of it.
It started to come to me that, you know, this entrenchment that he has with the Stanfields has actually made these more friendly, upbeat moments feel a bit uncharacteristic by contrast.
Yeah, it gives you that sense of doubt that, as you say, we get with Chris, and it connects the murder with something more warm, which is always a slightly odd but always intriguing way of doing the characters.
So what about our co-op scene? Obviously we have the setup where Marlowe is careful enough to make it seem like it's a booty call, as Kima says, as you know, they seem to buy into it quite clearly.
Yeah, it's great because obviously he's constantly being watched now, so even though he was cautious last season, he's had to up every aspect of his game, and you know, he'd want the police to be able to rationalise every single one of their movements. They're watching around the clock, and the booty call certainly works, as you say. It's a really good detail that they could have easily forgotten about, really, but they totally nailed it.
So we end up seeing Marlowe in a position where he's, you know, he is antagonising the other members. This is in the midst of the co-op having to deal with some limiting terms as well as the police, along with the city as a whole, of course. We have them dealing with territory being lost and going out into the county, and obviously the deal with their shipment being stolen and sold back to them. There is a sense of greater financial weakness. So some turbulence in the co-op, and it feels like Marlowe is using this as an opportunity to, you know, do some prodding, see who's vulnerable.
Yeah, brilliant. I really admire how much of a business-like approach the co-op takes to this sort of gentrification that's going on the east side of the town, and you know how the area is becoming wealthy, it's becoming, you know, studentized, as it were, and pushing this drug trade further out. It's such a forward-thinking thing for you know, for this drug organisation to be doing. It really shows you how there are multiple benefits to this co-op if it works properly. Everyone can really rack their heads together and really think about things.
Yeah.
And they're all, you know, despite the fact that at this stage it's just writing on the wall, as Prop Joe puts it, they're really putting together a plan of relocation of efforts already. So impressively elaborate is all I can say, really.
Yeah, it's not just a bunch of, you know, thugs and street dealers. This is a proper institution, proper organisation.
And a little bit like our investigation, from the detail, we can sense a little bit of frustration and boredom from Marlowe as well. As you can assume that he's been attending these meetings for the last couple of years. Again, there's been a long time since we last saw them in season 4, and there's now obviously this motivation to have his eye on securing the connect from the co-op through Spiros. That they set that up last episode. And, you know, there's some frustration there. He's still looking for an opportunity to do it, and I guess while the police's eyes on him, he's not really got that opportunity. So, as Slim Charles says, don't sleep on Marlowe, he up to something. Absolutely right. You know, Slim Charles is a wise man, follow that advice, because Prop Joe's made a few too many wrong moves by underestimating this dude.
Marlowe doesn't seem like the kind of person who likes to leave things to tick over. There is a constant desire for conquest in that man.
Oh yeah, all this sharing and caring co-op stuff is certainly wounding his ego, I imagine, bit by bit over the years.
Anything else you want to say about these two bits here?
No, I think that's it really for these two sections.
Okay, so our last Stanfield organisation section. Chris visits the courthouse while still being followed by McNulty. He interrupts Daniels, Rhonda, and Rupert Bond to ask for directions to the criminal clerk's office. Chris retrieves the file of Sergei Malatov, and he takes the photo with him. He recognises McNulty on his way out of the office. McNulty goes back and also looks at the file and remembers Malatov from his time on the Sobotka detail. Jimmy asks Signer if he recalls Malatov, but Signer was not part of the port investigation, and McNulty spends the evening drinking and flirting with a woman in a bar. He phones home to tell his partner Beatty that he will be late, and he denies being drunk. Later that night, Beatty is unable to sleep and goes to turn her porch light off, but finally decides to leave it on. So we'll leave out the actual conversation being had between Daniels, Perlman, and Bond, and leave that to the politics section when we come to it.
Yeah, but we see, I guess, if we leave that conversation out, we see Chris mainly here at the courthouse, and he's, to some extent, using Prop Joe's knowledge that he taught him against Prop Joe himself. He's using the police's public information files that, you do have to have the initiative to think about searching for, but he very efficiently finds the info on Sergei here. One of the few times where the show is kind of not revealing its hand. It's letting you indulge in the mystery with the cops, and we'll only find out next week what this is really all about, the Sergei connection. Yeah, really, really nice scene. I like how he's like old criminal, definitely, when he goes and has a chat with Daniels and Rhonda and Rupert. And of course, these guys are actually chatting about the future of the Stanfield investigation as he comes up to talk to them. Whether or not he hears and internally processes that is not clear. Probably not. But there is a certain level of irony to that these guys are just one level too high to even recognise Chris in this context.
Well, I wasn't going to bring it up until later on, but I think it's worth asking now that. Well, it's quite a bizarre moment when a key player in their largest investigation asks these three high-standing people in the world of police and justice for directions. You could argue that at least Daniels should recognise him, seeing as he's been in that detail office multiple times. He must see that big board with the people on it. We know that he's been involved in that sort of thing. So, I mean, I can believe that they're caught up in their own moment here, their own conversation. Maybe Chris just becomes another civvy to them in that moment when he's asking for directions. But I can see some people not being very forgiving of this moment, because I think it is interesting that someone as important to their investigative unit as Chris to come up and ask them, and to be quite blunt about that, definitely criminal.
Yeah. That was a little bit of a stretch, wasn't it?
I do feel like these people should know who this guy is, given that he is probably the second most important person in the entire investigation.
Well, he's the most important. He's the actual murderer.
Yeah, well, exactly.
So.
I mean, he's not the kingpin, but in terms of the murders, he is. He's public enemy number one. He's the murderer.
And despite Daniel spends most of this episode being frustrated with the fact that the investigation on the 22 bodies is going down, despite the fact that he practically communicated with the murderer during the episode. So it is, when you sit back and look at it, there is an incredible level of sort of convenience and irony to everything.
And this is not a guy who goes about incognito either. Like, Chris is well known. Everyone knows what he looks like. He doesn't have any kind of he doesn't hide or sneak around. He's a well-known character and much feared. And they just don't seem to react at all. Either they don't recognise him or they don't think anything of it.
No, I mean, I'm fairly forgiving. I can believe it, because obviously if you think back at Daniels, I agree that Daniels is the most likely to recognise here. Daniels left the MCU after the Barksdale investigation. Obviously, when Avon got arrested, he wasn't really there through any of the real Stanfield stuff.
He's still
that happened
overseeing
in
it, though. He's
season
the
4.
commander of CID.
No, I mean he became the Western District commander, didn't he, in season 4? The whole MCU stuff was overseen by Asher and Marimo and the rest of it, so he would have been way too busy to even come and have a look at what's going on in the MCU. He would have just trusted that it would have been doing okay, I guess. But anyway, I mean, perhaps I'm being overly defensive of Daniels here, but for me, I could kind of buy into it. I thought it was too much of a good moment for Chris to let it sort of deflate the rest of it.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a really intriguing moment, and like, you know, just looking at it in terms of how important Chris is in relation to them, you know, whether they should figure it out or not is a slightly different point into its sort of believability. But in terms of, is it a really good piece of like drama, and the way that it weaves those two stories together in quite a surprising way is great, just because of the chance involved in this encounter.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And even if they did recognise him, though, as McNulty would probably say, what could you do?
Yeah.
You know, there's already a unit that's trying to find some dirt on him. McNulty is actually in the courthouse with them at the same time. He's not talking to them, but we see him about a minute later, obviously sort of clocking Chris and following him around the courthouse. So, but, you know, the actual, you know, the meeting of the two groups is still quite something in itself, and the way it was set up.
I thought it was interesting how we talk a lot about how the Stanfield organisation are kind of flawless at this point and are so used to their regimen of caution that they never seem to let up, and there's no opportunity for the detail to kind of slip in and find out anything that could give them some progress. It's interesting here that at the courthouse, it seems a little sloppy of Chris to leave that folder open on the side.
Yeah, that's true.
Especially when he sees McNulty following him. So, you know, that's the opportunity that McNulty gets to find out what they're up to, and gives them a connection to where they can look at the case next. And of course, it being McNulty, he's the one to try and break it. He's the one to try and find out that information that, however controversial or tenuous in a legal sense, he's got to find out something that gives him a push to be like, oh, I can prove how smart I am by solving this case. And this is that moment. Yeah. And it's because of a bit of sloppiness on the hands of Chris, who probably should have, at the very least, you know, put the folder back or something.
I don't know. I feel like there was an element of deliberateness to him leaving that open.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe it's a come at me, bro,
smiling
kind of thing.
It's come at me, bro. There's an element of ego to it, and also, I you know, that these guys are so intelligent that I think Chris wouldn't let anything that would be very obvious to the case, you know, let it go. From my memory, I don't think McNulty ever does find out Sergei's significance to the case. And I guess Chris knows the same thing. There's nothing that he can really connect with what we're doing with Sergei. You know, obviously, Marlo's going to go and have a chat with him to try and get with Avon, but it's fairly separate from the actual investigation. And perhaps Chris is using that as a way of, as you say, offering a "come at me, bro" moment to McNulty.
Yeah, well, I think that. I think that you're right about them being smart enough to be able to make that kind of connection themselves, and like it being a bit of a taunt. But what it does do for McNulty certainly is it gives him a little extra spark. Him realizing that there is a even greater conspiracy at work, and he's just had a small taste of it. So you're right; it doesn't lead him to some big breakthrough by that itself, but it does give him a kind of spark, a sort of extra interest in the case, in order to, you know, I suppose, try and help justify what happens in episode 2 and beyond for McNulty's character, anyway.
Oh, certainly, yeah. And of course, following this, there's a little nod to the otherwise unexplained absence of Sydney in season 2, which completely went sort of unmentioned. So there we have it.
That's true, yeah.
And then I guess we get the final part with McNulty again.
Yes.
With his drinks.
It's interesting in this sort of another drunken scene with McNulty, we get a little bit of a nod to the moving of technology in our time frame. You know, using the cell phone instead of the bar phone.
Yeah, and McNulty's physically catching up, isn't he? He's about to use the bar phone, and then he's like, hang on a minute, we're in 2008.
I actually have a means of calling people in a mobile fashion.
Yeah. I don't know why he doesn't go outside though. Like, if you're trying to cover your tracks here, McNulty, you need to go away from the music.
I think it's just part of it's trying to show us that he has fallen back into his old ways. He's so used to the third of the charade that he's accustomed to going straight for the bar phone and calling whoever it is he needs to call to make his excuses. It's also demonstrating that he is not adapted to that, and in his drunkenness is just like, oh, here's my phone, I'll just call right here.
That's so true, yeah. And like, even though he's using his phone, he's still so used to standing in the bar and chatting on the payphone that he can't, as you say, he can't adapt and make the connection with his very narrow-minded drunkenness to actually, find a bit of reprieve from all the noise.
And it's difficult to watch because we know, at least in a small part, the kind of relationship that he has built with BD and how well they have done, and now we can see that this is being dragged down and he's telling these horrible lies. It's just
it's really
makes
painful.
it very difficult to watch because you can't help but sit there and think, what on earth are you doing? The people, this really does happen for a lot of people. They're making these terrible mistakes and just keep making them.
And they really do, go high on the tragedy with that they follow it up with a scene with BD where she does give him that second chance. She does turn the light back on, doesn't she? And
that's right, yeah.
But she's
not giving up
clearly
hope
very
yet.
Frustrated. No, she does give him quite a few chances. I mean, even at the end of season 5, when all of the madness, when McNulty's been reduced to a little peanut, she still seems to give him a chance. The final scene with those two is some sort of a reconciliation between the two of them on the doorstep of the house. So, maybe she does hold out hope for McNulty more than she should, but we do see more of her this season, which is a good thing. Really nice, really good character. Really great to see Amy Ryan back in the show.
She's very, very good, Amy Ryan. I'm glad that she's getting back into it, back in the show. Right.
All right.
So that's the end of our Stanfield section, or Stanfield strand.
Okay.
Let's take a look at the Western District. Just 2 sections for this one. Starting with, in the Western District, obviously, we have Sergeant Carver giving a briefing to the officers as he's acting as Sergeant in charge. Truck jokes about Carver's career aspirations, and dissent quickly arises when Carver begins the briefing. Bob Brown or other officers raise several issues with regard to the withholding of their pay, and Brown goes to leave the briefing. But Carver shouts his men down and orders Brown to his seat. He then reminds them of their duty as professionals, but when he announces that the department will not be servicing vehicles until further notice, unrest erupts again and Brown walks out. Carver discusses his difficulties later with Mello, but they are interrupted by Officer Castor, who reports a problem in the parking lot. Carver and Mello look on as Brown argues with Officer King from the overnight shift about the state of the vehicle he's handing over, and the argument turns into a fight. Mello sees no reason to break up the fight as morale is already as low as it can be.
It's an interesting rationalisation.
We have we're being introduced to Carver's ascension, as it were. Obviously, he gets the jibes, but it seems that they certainly respect him, and he is really good in the role. I think he really does seem very authoritative. He's respected, and he knows how to bring out his big shouting when he needs to, whilst also delivering those sort of Colvin-esque lessons about what it means to do the job. But even he is eventually beaten down by the inevitable tirade that follows the motorpool announcement. You can just tell from his expression when he's about to read it out that it's like, there's just nothing to make it better here.
It's a celebratory moment, definitely. Seeing him up on the podium, he's certainly made a quick ascent. We don't really get to see much of his development over the time, but,
so he feels deserving of it.
Yeah, certainly deserving, and we can buy into it very easily, and makes sense that after a couple of years of this very learned police work that he's been doing with his new found knowledge and enlightenment, that he would be in this position. able to keep up with the banter very well, as you say, but also very effective at keeping things under control and maintaining the respect. Really do love the moment where he sort of really goes in the big guns and screams like "sit" down at. It's some intensity there that I did appreciate. Over at Bobby Brown, who we see every so often. He was the original patrolman who was the first officer on scene at William Gant's death, although he had like a skinhead back then. So yeah, he sort of pops in and out, and he's also a prominent policeman in the corner as well. But yeah, the way he corrals the boys, he uses some grandstanding language. You know, we're about to police one of the roughest districts and the roughest cities in the world.
Yeah.
There's some real emotion behind that, and yeah, I guess the point of the scene is to introduce more overtly the other big driver of the season story, the money or the lack thereof. So it certainly does that in a very violent way.
It somewhat echoes the conversation that's had in the meeting room for the Baltimore Sun, where they're there with the editor in chief and whatnot, and they're talking. You know, he's talking about doing more with less.
Yeah,
and obviously coming from our title, and we're seeing that here as well with the police, and that's basically what Carver is explaining to them. Yeah, we're not getting paid as much, but we're professionals and we still have to police this really rough city, rough streets. We're just going to have to do more with less. It's essentially given that same speech.
Yeah, I mean, with Carver, there's at least an admission that we're not going to be able to be as professional as before, or we're not going to be able to do the same job.
Yeah, very different tack on the issue, certainly.
But with Kleber now in the room, it's very much we are not going to, sink for 1 minute from our previous performance.
There's no reason why we can't continue our brilliance.
Yeah, I think the message is rather more painful to hear with the Baltimore Sun. It's a bit of a different message.
And kind of ironic that this organisation that should be discovering the truth and providing it to people is in fact trying to cover up the realities of its own situation.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that with the actual paper section itself.
Yeah, so I guess we finish things off with the fight out in the yard.
That's right, yeah.
Of course, we see here that Mello is now the major. He's taken on Daniel's old role. So we've already seen 3 different Western majors since Season 3. Yeah, just a pretty bad situation. They're really, you can really feel for these guys. I'm not sure if it doesn't feel sort of inconceivable, but I think from the way they were originally setting it up, it almost sounded like they literally weren't getting paid. Like they just weren't paying the policemen and they couldn't afford to do anything. But later on, I think they make it clear that it's just the overtime that they're not getting. So they're still getting their basic pay packet, which I assume obviously goes on their essential spending.
Well, the reason why the overtime element is so important is because I assume so much of what they do is overtime.
Yeah.
They're quite willing to put in the extra hours of police work because obviously it gets them paid. And now they're kind of, because of that, they've come to be expected to do that kind of work in order to do their duties effectively, but they're now no longer getting paid for it. And, they're talking about all these expenses that they have as people with families and responsibilities and mortgages, taxes, all that sort of thing. And they may be relying on those that overtime to bridge the gap.
Yeah.
And now they're not getting it.
Bit of a change in circumstances, but they're still getting their basic salaries. And I guess these guys have so many, it's the trips to the bar and the rest of it that really take the hits here. And yeah, there's no morale left. They're fighting over which look, slightly comically beaten up vehicles. Yeah, so a good little bunch. The thing that I really liked about this scene, though, is that they immediately switch from us seeing this really beaten up Crown Vic police car to one of the brand new Stanfield mopeds being driven by like a 10-year-old, just to make it clear on whose resources are actually a little bit
that's right,
more abundant, should we say?
All right. So do you want to move on to our last Western District section?
Yeah,
Two
sure.
of two. So we have Carver, Colicchio, and Dozeman meeting Herc for drinks. They complain about the state of the department, and Carver remarks that Herc left the department at the right time. Herc shows off his new business suit and tells his old colleagues that he has more work than he can handle as an investigator for defense attorneys. He asks them to check on a name for him in exchange for a round of drinks. Herc later meets with Morris Levy and gives him the information his friends retrieved. Levy tells him that he could have spent less by using his expense account, and also points out that his client, Fat Face Rick, is on the front page of the Baltimore Sun.
There's a B in subtle.
So Herc going from shit to completely fine again, of course. Putting that B in subtle.
Yeah. I love how he says he's not used to having money. You kind of forget to buy around when once you actually get the money. And yeah, looking frustratingly pleased with himself after all the crap he's put everyone through, including the viewers.
Yeah, B for bloody lucky, maybe.
Yeah. It kind of makes sense, though. You sense he won't be much of an asset to a lawyer necessarily, but he's got a unique talent. He's got the connections on the inside of the force, which he's obviously making or slightly manipulating or abusing these unique talents here when he's digging out the info from those he knows. So
yeah, and with that expense account, he can sort of greatly increase his ability to influence those people with even more money.
Yeah. So he's on the dark side now, but he doesn't know it. He's not quite wise enough to really see the big picture.
It feels like Herc in his own little way is kind of the only character that could be on the dark side without ever really realizing it. Just kind of being unknowingly really sinister.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, everything he achieves this season, which it includes both, breaking the Stanfield investigation open and simultaneously crushing it.
Yeah.
Really explains how he doesn't understand that there are different sides. There's the light and the dark, really, and the law and the lawless, and
that means nothing to him. He only cares about himself.
Exactly. It's all whether it contributes to my forward progression or whether it doesn't. That's kind of how he sees the world. So
he's that careerist who gets everything for himself and just fuck everybody else.
Yeah.
And he causes an incredible amount of damage as a result, and so much of it, especially in this season, he just has no idea at all. And even if he knew, he probably wouldn't care. Just like with the investigation that we've got when they had Chris and Snoop and they were dealing with the nail and they were questioning about that. And so you sat them on the curb and fired the nail. And he's just like, yeah. So this is what happened to me, He completely just moves on. He doesn't even when he's given that information that what he was involved in, he doesn't seem interested. So it's pretty disgraceful. And as we see, he goes on here to be doing very well for himself, which is quite irritating.
Nonetheless, I think we'd miss him if he did go. The sort of love-to-hate character.
You can't completely hate him. He is a funny guy to see on screen.
Yeah, and it's nice that they found a fairly feasible way to keep him involved in the story.
I think so, yeah.
And he obviously gives Levy a chance to have the Levy season. This is definitely Levy's best season. He gets the most screen time, and Levy's really put through his paces at certain points as well. So it's certainly a fun little strand that these two have, Herc and Levy, as a little double act.
Yeah, what a strange double act it is, but it is brilliant.
As they obviously draw lines showing Herc reading the sports pages with the Orioles, and then obviously Levy keeping his eye on the big picture with seeing Nerese Campbell on the front page.
One small thing, I thought it was unusual. Maybe someone can shed some light on this. Maybe it's a sort of local thing. It's interesting that they had the Union flag in the window of the bar that they're drinking in. Carver, Colicchio, Dozeman, and Herc are all in that bar. And above the door in the window, there's a big Union flag there.
Yeah, perhaps it was an English-themed bar. A lot of Englishy pubs.
Didn't really look like it. I couldn't really... Did seem that way from looking at it from there. Yeah. I was trying to figure it out, but I don't know. Maybe perhaps someone can shed some light on that.
Yeah, one of our Baltimore locals might know of the specific bar itself, potentially.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah. So, yeah, we talked about Herc. We talked about how he runs around gaining capital for himself. amongst his friends and colleagues. It's all profit for him, though, even if it sort of leaves everyone else back at square one. And, of course, Levy's even funny enough to mention that he can actually get the round on expenses.
Yeah, it just gets better and better for him.
Yeah.
Right, shall we move on to our politics strand then?
Sure.
And this is a slightly bigger section. And in the same way that we did with the Stanfield organisation, we're going to start with a very big section as well. So, here we go. Burrell and Rawls meet with Mayor Carcetti and his advisors Michael Steintorf and Norman Wilson. Carcetti is looking for a further decrease in spending, but Burrell reports that they have already cut back on vehicle maintenance as far as possible, and Rawls adds that they are withholding pay from their men. Carcetti asks about the crime statistics, and Rawls says that if it will be impossible to deliver the decline Carcetti promised in his campaign with their budget cuts. Carcetti asks the department to wait for the money he's promised, as he needs all the available funds for the schools. Steintorf asks for other areas where the department budget can be trimmed, and Rawls suggests stopping the prolonged investigation into the vacant murders, as they are still not close to an arrest. Rawls suggests that they can characterise it as temporarily suspending the investigation. Burrell suggests that they need to lift the cap on secondary employment to bolster morale, and Carcetti reluctantly agrees. Carcetti asks Wilson for his thoughts at the end, and Wilson tells him that he should have accepted the governor's assistant with the school budget deficit last year, and that he has no hopes of progressing if he continues to withhold funds from the police department and renege on his campaign promises. Later, Burrell and Rawls meet with Daniels and tell him that the major case unit is to be shut down due to budgetary issues. He asks about the wisdom of stopping the investigation into the vacant murders and complains that Carcetti has broken his promises to the department. Daniels' superiors encourage him to use his influence if possible, but Burrell also tells Daniels that they have had to take back all department vehicles from officers ranked colonel and below. So, there we have our meeting there, our first politics meeting, and of course, we see the results from that. We get Wilson's opinions on it, and one of the key takeaways from that meeting, which is that our major case unit is going to be shut down. We find out. Obviously, we see Daniels learning that information later on. So, starting with the very first meeting, I'd say that it's not a very promising start for Carcetti at all, given that the first thing we hear this New Day mayor say involves how are the stats. It's a very disappointing beginning for Carcetti.
Immediately back on the agenda. It's another scene that really epitomizes the whole more with less thing. As we say, practically every scene is laced with this theme. And, he's the one who cut the money to the police department. He's hearing that they can't even afford to pay the officers now. But yet I still want my double-digit decline. He's just repeating what Klebenau wants. He wants the same performance without the money. And he just, it's just desperate, not thinking straight. That's not going to happen, Carcetti. And, first of all, as you say, the stats shouldn't really be the priority. But if they are going to be the priority, at least fund it properly. So, yeah, it's a real catch-22 for him, completely.
He's now so far above the actual action itself that he just can't see the wood for the trees. He's kind of lost sight on it. So, like you say, like Klebenau, it's just become you can just do it exactly as you were, but with less. Yeah, that's doable because I say so.
Obviously, it's better than Klebenau because he still always has an ounce of sympathy with what he does. That's what makes him an effective politician in many ways. That's what got him elected, I think. But, he's still asking for the same thing. He's asking for the impossible. And to add on insult to injury, his original promises are still there. He's saying that, changes are coming. Everyone will get their pay rise, at some point. Carcetti always seems quite sincere, and when he says this again, it feels genuine. But you know that you've been fooled enough times now that by the time this debt has been dealt with, it will probably be a new mayor in power. And
I don't doubt his sincerity at the time. I think that's true.
Yeah. So it's tricky. I mean, even Carcetti probably doesn't doubt his sincerity. He just overestimates his abilities, really, as mayor. The only thing, to put it into perspective, the only thing he's achieved really as mayor in terms of a new day is getting Daniels up the chain, and the MCU back into action as a result of that. Everything
Which
else
is a
he's
good thing.
mentioned, yeah, it's certainly a very good thing. But everything else he's promised hasn't really happened. The major one being, of course, Burrell not just being retained on the police force, but then becoming an integral part of Carcetti's, close circle, really. So it's a complete reneging on that front.
And then we get Norman giving some wise counsel after this meeting. Should they be giving up the investigation on someone as... this is actually during the meeting itself where he questions whether they should be giving up the investigation on someone as dangerous as Marlo Stanfield for the sake of the budget. He questions about whether or not they should have secondary jobs as well because it's taking police officers' eyes off police work. So he's offering some wise counsel here that is essentially ignored by Carcetti, and I feel that following on from the conversation that he had with Coleman Parker that we see at the end of season 4, you can tell that Norman has given up all hope on Carcetti at this point.
Oh yeah, he's completely lost any credibility that he may have attached to him. The new day is well and truly over, as many characters have mentioned, literally. And yeah, instead of taking Norman's advice, obviously Norman's advice is kind of unhelpful because he just sort of brings up past bad decisions. But it's a very good point. This could have all been avoided by taking the governor's payout. You wouldn't have to cut anything. The money would be there to cover the school systems, and you get going with the city and do the things you want to do. So it is, when you think about it like that, it's a very silly thing that's happened, and he prefers to go with Burrell's suggestion. We're just going to duke a headline. We're going to say that instead of the investigation being cancelled, it's just been suspended pending new developments, and that sounds rather good, and we're going to go with that. So
right, so this then leads us from this decision that they've made has to be delivered to Daniels, and understandably he is a bit vexed as to why they're stopping this investigation that's clearly related to something incredibly important, but in a similar fashion that this is echoed in the Baltimore Sun strand as well, about how that was a year ago. So the fact that it happened is kind of pointless because it happened a while ago, so nobody cares about that anymore. It doesn't matter how tragic it was and how terrible it was. That's old news now. And this is echoed by Templeton to Gutierrez when he says that at the bar about... And she's like, they had that story about the homeless murders that got national coverage. Yeah, but that was a year ago. Nobody cares about that anymore. And so this absolutely devastating tragedy of all these people being murdered and left to rot inside vacant houses in Baltimore. Oh, yeah, that was a year ago. It's just not held in any emotional regard at all. It's just a purely functional political meaning to them.
It's always assessed in terms of how it can affect the person in terms of their progression, isn't it? It's always self-preservation sense, and it's very bad. And Daniels is clearly very disappointed to hear that as we saw last season, very early in the game, the MCU is being decommissioned. Although literally forever this time. It's not like they're just going to put a load of humps on it. They're just going to get rid of it completely. And the idea of the new day in deflation, it really comes up here. Daniels looks more disappointed in himself for kind of buying into the new day in the first place, I think, than necessarily
boy, did he
being
buy
disappointed.
into it.
What's that?
I said, and boy, did he buy into it.
Oh yeah, he was completely torn up in that fairy tale with Rhonda. Yeah.
Oh, you're not toasting him now.
Oh, no chance. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I've completely forgot about the toasting moment, but the New Day moment always sticks in my mind as that memorable, really nice, lovely scene. But
and we've both obviously, we'll both say that we do really like Carcetti as a character, and he is great, and he is still very likable. But there is no denying that what he's done here for the sake of his ridiculous, sort of governor run. That, to be fair, a lot of it is to do with Steindorf and that devil on his shoulder.
Yeah,
impact.
Steintorf
You know,
did it.
He
Don't you
really
blame
is
Carcetti?
like, yeah, Carcetti is, obviously it's his decisions being made, but Steintorf is really, really influential.
Oh, for sure. So for Daniels, I think it's less about being disappointed with Carcetti as a mayor. It's more about just disappointed in his own expectations, and you can certainly see that on his face when he's told about that. And yeah, he's obviously told that his take-home car's off as well. It's not just the patrol cars that are on the toilet. And I like, again, how we immediately cut straight from this scene of him being told about his take-home vehicle being rescinded straight to Michael's house.
Yeah.
And we start on
moped.
the TV, and his take-home moped, we assume supplied by Marlowe here, is just sat there looking very shiny in the corner.
The vehicle of choice in the Stanfield organisation, it seems now.
Yeah. So, yeah, just again a very nice contrast to draw.
Although they've always had more of a thing with bikes than any of the other organisations. You remember in season 3, where they do that drive-by on the motorbike and Poot obviously kind of feigns death in order to stay alive. They're kind of the only organisation that sort of prolifically uses bikes in their dealings. Everyone else kind of has the big SUVs and sticks to that, really.
Yeah, it's true, actually. Yeah, the Barksdales are very much into their Chevy Escalades or whatever they were called, Ford Explorers, which are, more typical drug dealer vehicles, or certainly more stereotypical ones. But you're right about the bikes. That's a good point that I hadn't really considered.
So anything else you want to say about this bit here, our first politics section?
No, I think we'll move on.
Oh.
I think just on the bikes quickly, though, obviously the bikes are a nice representation of kind of the Marlowe mentality. There is this element of sort of showing off and bling, but it's not conventional. It's not the sort of one where a nice Chevy Escalade would provide that bling to the street and show off your reputation.
He's not got his stereotypical big rims and tinted windows.
Yeah. It's more of just a very... Obviously, I guess the scooters are far more practical and cheaper, and, it's this element of just having the power rather than having any of the spoils that go with it. It's very, very pure form of power.
Mm.
Anyway, sorry, let's move on to the next section.
Okay, so the second section, we have Carcetti and Campbell meeting with a representative from the US Attorney's Office to discuss their problem with drug violence that could be helped by imposing federal statutes on the offenders. The federal agencies are still prioritising political corruption and counter-terrorism, and the representative suggests that they could offer a team of FBI agents for the vacant murders if the Clay Davis investigation was taken federal. But with State Attorney Bond keeping the case local, Carcetti is enraged, accusing the representative of party politics, and refuses the deal. Wilson enters and asks if the meeting went well, and the three of them discuss Bond keeping the case to generate political capital for himself, perhaps hoping to one day run for mayor. Carcetti remarks that this would make Bond a rival for Campbell's own mayoral ambitions, and that either outcome would be bad for her. She tells Carcetti not to worry about her and asks what he plans to do, having cut himself off from federal assistance when they are in dire need of help. He simply blames them.
Yet another scene where Wilson comes in for this debrief and faces another disappointing outcome to one of his meetings, where he makes more of a selfish move than a move that would allow him to be helped out by someone else. Someone is offering help here with a very important issue that he has. And again, out of pride, he's turning things away.
Also another scene where Campbell loses out either way, and thus just becomes the ultimate enemy to Carcetti all the time.
Yeah. Campbell. Oh, Nerys, sorry, yeah. For some reason I had a massive mental block there.
Yeah, Nerys Campbell, she kind of stands to lose either way.
Yeah, she seems quite with Carcetti, obviously, at the time, because she's obviously thinking... Well, I guess it's kind of it becomes a bit of a Democrat-Republican thing when the FBI is actually in, the senior FBI chappie is in the meeting.
That's right, yeah, he kind of makes it all about the partisanism of it all.
Yeah, and there's this idea that obviously because both Carcetti and Campbell are these Democrats, that they want to sort of go against anything that would try to discredit the Democrats. And so in some way it's quite noble that both Tommy and Nerisse are fighting for this wider Democrat cause, but ultimately it is a selfish move, and again Carcetti's rationalizing it. It's on them, it's their fault that they made this deal like that. But as a mayor who needs to fix a city, he should be jumping on these sorts of bargains. I guess even if the FBI dude does have some sort of shady intentions of his own involving partisan politics, that's on them. That's on them is the response we get. It's a very common response to lots of things in the show.
And that whole thing is predicated on protecting the Democrats overall. If that's what they think they're doing, like you say, taking this maybe a little bit noble stance and their loyalty to their party and whatnot, but ultimately it's damaging for the city, and it's Carcetti's job to be the mayor. So yeah, it's a poor show either way. And
obviously with Clay Davis being the key person in argument here, it's perhaps scary to ponder how much Tommy may have come to rely on Clay, like previous mayors have done. Although with Nerisse, we can certainly predict that factors into her opinion on the matter. She's certainly in with Clay. The fact that Tommy later agrees to sanctioning the local Clay Davis investigation detail, I think that's enough to suggest that Tommy has avoided getting in bed with Clay. He's obviously stayed bitter about the stuff before the election. Still maintains his noble intentions as far as that awful weasel of corruption goes. I guess he's kept his distance, which is nice to see.
Well, it shows that it's quite a mad world indeed, where this, someone like Clay Davis is brazenly swindling people out of tens of thousands of dollars, and when Carcetti is offered a position to hand him over to the federal authorities, is actually sort of defending the man, essentially, by proxy.
Yeah.
It's just bizarre that he would want to defend someone like that. And like you say, there's a sense that he has become a bit more dependent upon him than he might have liked to have been. And this is the familiar trap that Clay knows how to spring. And we see that because they do try to, when they do take on this case with Clay later on, one gets a sense that having it on that local level puts Clay at an advantage.
Yeah, obviously there's nowhere near the manpower or the reach that the FBI would have had on that. And as much as a redemption it is later on to see Tommy sanction this Davis detail, he clearly is set on having Davis done. He's willing to spend school money, what should be school money really, on this detail is something at least. But yeah, as you say, it's not going to match up to what the feds could have done, and potentially the feds could have wrapped up the case. Obviously Freeman and Sidner come close, but Davis talks himself out of a charge. It's an incredible moment. So
and it ends up being too little too late from Carcetti, who, like we say, could have had those extra resources.
Definitely. I guess finally it's worth mentioning, of course, Nerisse appearing to stand with Carcetti for the meeting, and then as soon as it's over and there's the debrief, he's kind of knifed in the back, and she reveals that he has turned down the help for a city in great need.
Yeah.
She makes a true point, but it's not the sort of thing that you want one of your political aides to be telling you, sort of. So, yeah.
All right, so our last politics section then. We've sort of semi-discussed this already, but this is more about their conversation specifically. It's the one with Daniels and Pullman meeting with State's Attorney Rupert Bond, and they relay the news about the closure of the Major Crimes Unit. They suggest trying to reason with Carcetti to retain the Stanfield detail, but Bond is more concerned about the Clay Davis case, and Pullman explains that she needs Freeman for the case to go ahead. Bond agrees to accompany them to the meeting with Carcetti, but Carcetti does not have time for the meeting, and Bond and Daniels instead have to have the discussion with him in the corridor. He refuses to revoke the order to disband the Major Crimes Unit because of the financial pressure that they are under, and Bond responds that the Clay Davis investigation will be compromised, so Carcetti allows them to keep 2 detectives for that investigation only.
Outrage.
And 1 thieving politician trumps 22 dead bodies. Good to know.
That's a classic Daniel line, that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a good one.
That really resonates.
Good to know.
Oh man, it's a good little chat. And of course they get visited by Chris, who's feeling quite comfortable in his skin here. And yeah, I think we discussed a lot of it. Obviously, there's the whole ironic element of Chris being the subject of the case which they are discussing. And I guess we should perhaps just move on to the bit with Carcetti then.
Yeah, so they have this meeting that's not really a meeting so much as an encounter that they have in the corridor just as he's about to leave for some charity do, I believe. So he kind of makes a bit of a concession there by giving them obviously not quite realising the situation that's going on and sort of stopping these major case units. And Daniel's trying to explain about an investigation just coming to a stop. It doesn't really work like that. So yeah, he kind of tries to make some kind of concession about allowing them to keep the two detectives for the Clay Davis investigation and rushes off. Really, we can see that another element of Carcetti making all these decisions is that, he's just, I would imagine he's just non-stop all the time. Someone in that position is just constantly going to be, going to this place, going to that place, sticking to this ridiculous timetable that they can't even actually stick to, and just constantly frazzled in the mind as a result. It's
just another reminder of how this guy has no time whatsoever to actually address his own original aspirations that he had of the job. Like, it's just not going to happen. Like, and this scene also, I guess, we discover that the Stanfield investigation also on the side has been doing some Clay Davis stuff, which I imagine is probably solely the domain of Freeman. But clearly both of those cases have been assigned to them. We're only realising this now.
Right, anything more you want to say for our politics section?
No, I mean, we've said a lot against Carcetti here. I still think it's worth just saying that it's good that Carcetti is at least having the balls to go after Clay. He's trying to disrupt years of state house corruption here, like really entrenched, and of course it requires less manpower, more brain power than the Stanfield one in many ways, and so it makes a bit more financial sense that he would prop that case up rather than the murders one, even though Daniels' point is equally valid. So but yeah, I mean, giving up on a nationally significant semi-mass murder plot is pretty icky.
Not a nice decision either way. Definitely one of those big bowls of shit that he's got to deal with, and I guess that's one of the main point with Carcetti's character is that it doesn't matter how aspirational you are or how well-intentioned you are. There is something about the job and the institution and the culture that everyone is involved with and the political game that just beats it out of you. And there's no way to maintain it. You are, as demonstrated by this ridiculous schedule that he's got here as being one factor. It's physically, mentally not possible to retain all of these aspirations that you have full mayor election.
Yeah. Oh, completely.
So, I mean, you can so easily damn Carcetti in one moment and sympathise with him with the next. That is kind of what The Wire does so well, is making these really complex, morally challenging moments with these characters. Not trying to say that this is our good guy and this is our bad guy, this is our good situation, this is the right choice. Saying just how difficult it is to make all of these choices.
Yeah, I think more so than perhaps any other character that the show doesn't know whether it's completely on Carcetti's side or completely against him, because you could certainly read it in either sense more so than any other character, I think. Whether he's the complete villain of the show or whether he's just a very, very he's a hero in unfortunate circumstances. That's what I really love about the guy.
Right, so should we take a look at our major crimes unit, just the one section for this one?
Yeah.
Daniels briefs the major crimes unit even on their fate. They are angry that their work is not seen as important. Daniels tells them that he appealed to the mayor personally and that funds are reserved for the patrol and crime suppression. Daniels offers the possibility of reviving the investigation in the future, and Freeman remarks that they will have to wait another year. Daniels sympathises that he was also promise changed in the department. He gives the detectives new assignments. So McNulty and Greggs return to homicide. Dozeman is temporarily assigned to tactical. Asher will move to the Northern Division, and Freeman and Sidner will be assigned to the State's Attorney's Office for the Clay Davis case. Daniels promises to reunite the unit when the funds are available and apologises. When McNulty and Greggs report to the Landsman Squad, McNulty is dejected, insists that the new detective relinquish his desk as it was once his, and in a burst of anger kicks his desk.
Yeah, so despite the high emotions, I guess we can appreciate Daniels being back with almost all of his original crew for a little while at least. Dozeman being the odd one out, I guess.
Yeah, it's nice to kind of get everyone back in the room. We get our mirroring phrases as well. We have McNulty talking about I wonder what it likes to work in a real police department, and this, chronologically in terms of the episode, is after we have seen Gus's. It's not actually Gus that says it. Sorry, one of the other reporters who says what it's like to work in a real newspaper.
I think it's Stephen. Is it Twig? I think the police reporter guy. I think he mentions it.
So yeah, it's kind of our mirroring phrase in the episode as well.
Yeah, no, it's certainly good. The idea that everyone is convinced that they're living in some almost alternate reality where nothing works, when perhaps they should just adjust their expectations and realise that the world doesn't quite work in the way that they might expect. So I think it certainly raises an interesting philosophical idea on that front. Obviously, that the main gist of this is the whole disappointment of the loss of the case. And the idea that the Stanfield business can suddenly really speed up following this. They can accelerate things. They can probably think about making their move on the co-op, which they will do very shortly. You could therefore argue that this move here with Daniels kills Prop Joe. That there's so many things that you can attribute to other things here. As they, the Stanfields now have enough privacy to do things like go ahead and shoot Prop Joe. So.
Yeah, it takes that watchful eye off the Stanfield organisation. Like we mentioned earlier, they are. It's difficult because we know that the unit is not making much progress in terms of the case, but they are acting as an effective deterrent. So, like you say, them being taken off here is just a big red flag for the bull that is Marlowe. Just go and seize this opportunity. No longer under that watchful eye. Like you say, you could argue that it is responsible in part for the death of Prop Joe because it gives him the ability to go up and do that without worry of anyone trying to find out what he's up to.
Definitely.
Completely opens the doors for him. So, real shame.
Oh, yeah. And I guess we get our landmark. We get McNulty goes back to the homicide department for the first time since the pilot.
The return of the prodigal son, as Landsman puts it.
It's been a good 6 years he's been off the force, and he's going to stay there for the rest of the season at least, and he's going to cause some real ruckus in this department over the next 9 episodes. He is angry as hell.
Yeah, not happy at all. He's finally got back on a decent investigation based on the idea that it's this new day and everything has crumbled for him. His life is kind of crumbling through all this alcoholism and this womanizing back in his life. The investigation has been running a bit stale, and now they're losing it entirely because all of this idea about the new day is complete nonsense, and it's nonsense for McNulty as well. So it's all just come down, culminates in this big sort of burst of rage that he has where he kicks the desk.
Yeah.
So like you say, this is a sign of very bad things to come for McNulty.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I guess we're on to our new institution then.
Yes, we're going to take a look at the Baltimore Sun now, which is our new setting. Right, so we'll start with at the Baltimore Sun itself, outside, in fact. We see the city desk editor, Gus Haynes, discussing foreign bureau closures and potential cutbacks in the staff at the paper with his colleagues. They determine that the paper will first offer to buy out some of its staff and will then begin making junior staffers redundant. The senior reporters joke that it will be a shame to lose the attractive but inept young writers. Haynes encourages Fletch, one of his young reporters, to begin writing early instead of waiting for calls so he will not miss another deadline. He talks to the political reporter Jeff Price about a forthcoming council meeting. Haynes then notices his colleagues watching a fire from a window. He tells them to call Twig, the police reporter, and berates them for standing around and watching. He asks Jay, the rewrite man, about a story on the Associated Press about cutbacks on city bus lines. He then notices that it is 2 o'clock and calls for budget lines from his reporters. And Haynes gets a call to say that they have no photograph for a racetrack story and decides to send Swag, a photographer, to the fire. So we get a bit of a little introduction to the paper, and particularly after he goes inside, Gus basically gives us a tour around the newsroom and all the desks and all the different people at these desks, and it makes a good introduction to our new setting and our characters.
Oh yeah, and one of the things that's been established by a lot of viewers is that the authenticity of the newsroom itself is second to none, really. And that it's been recreated very lovingly and accurately, and that makes sense because Simon was at that very paper for a number of years. So this is very much his season, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone who listens to the podcast is very familiar with this world. Perhaps they could comment on the authenticity of these bits if they do know. But there's certainly a lot of new jargon being introduced, a lot of work-specific language that we're being introduced to, which is kind of a refreshing challenge, seeing as I feel like anybody watching The Wire, even if it's for the first time, a lot of brand new viewers sometimes have difficulty with a lot of the slang and colloquialisms and accent and everything throughout all of our characters. I think by the start of season 5, you're pretty well seasoned to the street and the police and everything else. So getting the Baltimore Sun in and getting a whole bunch of new language is like a fresh challenge.
Yeah, definitely. There's not afraid of that. The E. deadline and all the rest of the various
budget
phrases.
Lines.
Yeah, all of that.
Referring to photographs as art.
Yeah. So it's just a lot of the nuances of the whole system. And it's interesting that they wait sort of halfway through the episode, we finally meet these guys. And it's very rare. I mean, it's a season premiere. We're used to the idea of being bombarded by an absolute slew of new faces. And they wait. I don't think there's a new face at all until we're half an hour in here. So we're very much taking things a little bit more slowly. It's a much more, I guess, because we're so seasoned, I guess it doesn't feel like that. But we really are taking things a little bit more leisurely this premiere, and just a fairly laid back introduction to everyone. Bill Zorzi, who is a writer on the show and also wrote "Show Me a Hero" with Simon. Is playing himself or a version of himself with the same name. He's in the smoking area outside, and then there's also Twig, the police reporter, and lots of sort of gossip about Kleber now hiring sexy young things who can't write a line. So, and of course we have your mirroring line about working for the real institution.
That's right, yeah.
And you could really replace the word newspaper or police department with anything, and it would just kind of work in this show.
I think there's something to be said as well for the when Gus spots the fire out the window and talking about people standing around watching a fire. It kind of feels like it's a commentary on quite a lot of stuff going on in the city of people just standing around watching terrible things happen. Too busy concerned with their own worlds and their own problems. I'm not the police reporter, nothing to do with me. That kind of bystander effect.
And the fire reminds me a little bit of the effects in season 3 for the towers coming down. It's not, it's one of the few moments where you can kind of see the budget of the Wire behind it, sort of thing. It's not particularly convincing smoke effects.
It's not the best digital effects, no.
No. But we do get to see the lady standing around watching the fire is Laura Lipman, who is David Simon's real-life wife. So just another little cameo there.
And of course, Gus himself directed the very first episode of The Wire.
Yeah, he directed the first, second, and he'll direct the finale as well this season. So Clark Johnson, he's an important just face in the show in general.
And a very good actor.
Yeah, he plays Gus incredibly well. Gus is a little bit divisive, I know, amongst viewers, and I can totally get behind some of the criticism of Gus. Like, he is the most morally clean character in the show. He hasn't got a speck of dirt on him, whilst also having this kind of raw, aggressive, unpredictable little cool edge to him. So I can't think of one moment where he messes up, where he does something that we know the Wire characters love to do, which is just sort of get things wrong and get frustrated. Obviously he gets very frustrated, but as a moral entity, he's very clean.
Is Gus Haynes David Simon's power fantasy?
That's often
there is an element of sort of the Gus Haynes the mouthpiece. I think that's kind of a criticism that's laid at his feet, is that he just, because like you say, he is such a clean cut character, but is also trying to be edgy and confrontational and questioning the establishment, making these points and trying to imprint these journalistic standards on the other reporters, that he does end up feeling a bit like a mouthpiece for David Simon's own thoughts on journalism and the way that it should be.
Yeah, to contribute to that as well, he has slightly forced kind of catchphrases like, don't be scared of committing an act of daily journalism. It's just stuff like that sort of slightly heralds him in very high regard as a character. Very memorable, very enjoyable to watch, and you can't help but applaud the character in many ways. But he occupies just a slightly different space from so much of the show. And I'm sure, as we'll get to it soon, Templeton occupies the polar opposite of that place.
Yeah, maybe the writers and people in those newsrooms really are, use their love of language and eloquence to great effect, and really are like that in general conversation. It's like when they're outside and he goes, "Gentlemen," and I think as Zorzi says, "?" as in to kind of point out that it's this statement could be used questionably about them.
Yeah.
So this is kind of using their journalistic and writing abilities as part of their everyday conversations that they have with one another. I guess that makes sense. And obviously it's most likely exaggerated somewhat for the sake of the entertainment of the show, and it definitely makes good TV to see Gus around on screen. He is great to see on screen, but yeah, criticisms raised, and many of them are very valid.
And I guess the final thing to mention is Jeff Price, who we've already seen in season 3, reporting on Carcetti's. He's just spinning one of Carcetti's stories basically to try and gain his political capital. So yeah, nice callbacks, and they've already done some sort of work to set up this strand, which is nice to see. And Jeff Price, I believe, is actually a genuine reporter who worked with Simon back in his reporting days. I believe a number of these characters are literally character actors. They are the guys who worked with Simon, and they're coming back to reprise their roles as journalists just within the show this time.
He's hiring all his mates.
Yeah,
getting all his mates.
So it really shows you how much of a personal project it is, particularly this fifth and final season.
Right, onto our second section for the Baltimore Sun strand then. I got a slightly bigger one here. So Haynes attends an editorial meeting supervised by Klebanow. Phelps, the state desk editor, reports cutbacks on the MTA routes, and Klebanow senses that the story will affect many people. The staff downplay the story as the cutbacks have been suggested before, and the story was broken by the Daily Record. The staff explained that the story would have been covered by their transpo reporter, but they have not had that position since the last round of buyouts. Klebanow claims that the staff should still have picked up that story, and that cutbacks at the paper are not an excuse for missing stories. But Haynes points out that despite Klebanow's claims that they have more resources than the Daily Record, they are still without a transpo reporter. Managing editor James Whiting joins the meeting, and Klebanow asks Haynes for the major stories from the city desk. He lists a story from Warren Castle about the state's attorney complaining about a decline in quality casework by a city police, Price's story on the council meeting and homeless vote, a fatal road traffic collision, 2 overnight murders, and the row house fire. Rebecca from Regional Affairs reports a story on a John Hopkins press conference and on University of Maryland not making its desegregation goals. Whiting objects to the story as he is a personal friend of Gene Robbins, the Dean of Journalism there, and has been told that the reputation with black faculty and students is much improved. But Haynes questions Whiting about Robin's race, also pretending to forget Robin's name, and Whiting dismisses the question and tells Klebanow to shelve the story until more reporting can be done. After the meeting, Rebecca questions Haynes on his antagonising of Whiting.
Gale from Breaking Bad is playing Klebanow.
That's right. Well, it hadn't been Gale by this point, but yeah.
No.
This is pre-Gale.
Definitely. I saw The Wire it's a little bit after Breaking Bad, so I was pleasantly surprised to see this guy recast, David Costabile, I think, being an incredibly cold-faced arsehole for the whole of this season.
Yeah. Yeah, we get our meeting here. I think it's although this kind of comes up slightly later in this section that we've got here. I like it, the fact that it mirrors slightly the co-op scene where we have Marlowe antagonising Joe and the others there, and in this scene we have Gus antagonising Whiting and sort of by extension Klebanow and the others. Kind of have these characters prodding people to see what effect it has.
Oh yeah. And this is, again, another more with less epitome moment, but perhaps the titular one, and the one where it's most aggressively enforced, where, you know, as we've been discussing already, Klebanow asking for the impossible. And instantly they're making it clear the limitations within which the paper is working and with which Gus is getting very frustrated. So the expectation that they'll be able to scratch as many good stories together without the original manpower, and that the actual journalistic freedom the company is sort of founded on is limited, because as we see Whiting, who's actually Klebanow's boss, I think he's above Klebanow, he's actually stomping certain stories, i.e. one that's concerning racial politics that reflects badly on like a personal friend of his.
Yeah.
So they're clearly showing already that there's this corrupt edge to the way things are going, but that things are trying to be kept on the down low, as it were. You know, they're not trying to raise alarm bells about it.
Yeah, kind of a reminder of the crime rate as well, the fact that there's 2 murders overnight. And it's just kind of like just another part of the city desk, just another couple of murders to report. Yeah,
it's just right in the middle of the list.
We also get a little bit from all the other, you know, we're sort of learning the different departments, if you like, of the newspaper. So the other one is regional affairs. And that's obviously the one that we get the University of Maryland story with. And then their comparison to another popular newspaper, the Daily Record, and talking about having more resources than them. Still not having this transpo reporter. I'm not sure exactly what that is. A transport
reporter, I think.
Yeah, just kind of general transport-related public affairs, I guess. So yeah, getting sort of the inner workings of the newspaper there, which is great. Let's move on to our third section then. So we have Haynes correcting a semantic error in Alma Gutierrez's writing about the fire and bemoans the junior reporters with his colleague Jay. Gutierrez checks a dictionary and concedes her error, and her colleague Scott Templeton asks her what she is working on, and she remarks that Baltimore is a bad city. He remarks that Baltimore is a bad city for news as few stories go national. Alma reminds him of the vacant murders story a year ago, and he reminds her that it is still unsolved. Meanwhile, Gus is disgusted to find a burnt doll inserted into the photographs of the fire, and the state desk editor reminds him that it is most likely a trademark of Carlyle, the photographer. Haynes complains to Swag and refuses to use the photograph. Price attends the council meeting and reports back to Haynes, who reviews the agenda from the council meeting and finds something that the council is buying property from drug trafficker Ricardo Fatface Rick Hendricks and selling him better property for less than its value as part of their redevelopment efforts. Price is sent back to the council meeting to observe the vote, find out who sponsored the proposal, and get a quote. Gus asks Gutierrez to go to the property, a strip club named Desperados, and get a quote from Hendricks himself, and he assigns Templeton to do the background research on the story, and Templeton is disappointed to have the least glamorous role. So some great work from Gus here as we see him kind of turning this into a slightly different story after picking up something from these minutes of the meeting.
Yeah, really good bit of reporting, just to remind us, I guess, or to set a precedent for what good reporting is, as opposed to a lot of this, as they put it, Pulitzer pursuing journalism. And that's coupled alongside more lamentations over the glory days, I guess, with the resident grammar dinosaurs, I guess I'd like to put them, who are sort of berating Gutierrez for a bit. She's not, I guess you could kind of, if you were watching it first time, you might assume she's one of the statuesque blondes that they hire. But she's actually considered, the show holds her in quite high regard, I think, as a young reporter. So this is kind of just a little slip that she has. And it's a good chance to remind everyone what evacuation really means, because that was certainly news to me as well.
Yeah, to evacuate a person is to give them an enema.
Said with so much nonchalance.
But yeah, so it's kind of another nice moment of the obsession over language and use of it in their journalistic standards.
Just the way that, is it Jay Spry, who I believe, the name is exactly as it was for the rewrite guy back in the 90s at the Sun. He obviously, the language he uses to sort of, the gods still reside in the details, and this sense that they're constantly trying to hold on to the integrity of this slipping operation. It's all going, and they're all very sad about it. And of course, we see that Gus, who stands out as our good journalist, he for the most part rejects sentimentality like the show does. He doesn't like the fact that this doll has been added. It's very much a disapproving of it, and wants that removed. So
yeah, that's kind of the fakery on the part of the photographer as like some kind of added dramatic flourish to the photo, which obviously is not to the taste of Gus, who finds it actually a little bit offensive to be trying to insert some kind of statement into something that is supposed to be a true to life photograph.
Yeah, raw hard facts rather than doctoring, certainly. And we also meet our Templeton, who's the other side of Gus's story. I guess he's one of the pure evils, shown covered in nothing but dirt, nothing but selfish motivations. So I think this is perhaps one of the areas where the season 5 criticisms begin to rear their head. The authenticity of the newsroom is intact, the moral ambiguity isn't. So in general in the show, with a few exceptions, it's mostly the awful politicians like Clay and Levy who are the bad people, the genuinely unredeemably bad people, and the rest are actually good people who have run out of options. Whereas Templeton is just this guy who we haven't had a background of, who we don't know the struggles that he goes through to make him sympathetic and complex, and without this context, he becomes across as perhaps a pretty shallow character, as he very, very quickly is driven to get on board with McNulty's serial killer plot.
Yeah, he's just kind of the whole thing is this slightly one-dimensional, pure desire, it's just pure motivation, isn't it? I just want to have such and such prize, or I want to get the career. It's almost kind of like Herc in a way that it's just going after the career, going after the progression, and wanting to be recognised for what you've done. He kind of reminds me of Herc in that way. But unlike Herc,
definitely.
we don't have that same kind of familiarity in the build-up of his story and establishment of the things that he actually can be good at, for better or worse. But we don't have that with Templeton. We don't have that background. We're just introduced to him at this stage, and we have to kind of take that at face value.
Definitely, yeah. And then, of course, Gus comes to the rescue again with, as you said, the last hour spot, the final hour spot of the shady deal with Fat Face Rick. So, yeah, really good to see.
So, yeah, we then come on to our final section, if you want to take a look at that.
Yeah.
And our penultimate of the episode as a whole. So we have Haynes watching over Jay's shoulder as he edits the story. We have Kleber now, another editor, checking with Haynes about its potential, and he suggests that it is front page material. He tells Kleber now that Hendricks will net $1 million of city money, and have better property than he started with on the transaction. They ask why the council is acting so favourably towards Hendricks, and Haynes explains that they are still checking campaign donation records, but already have $40,000 worth of contributions from either Hendricks or people using the address of the Desperados Club. Klebanow asks why the story was not in Haynes' budget lines report, and Haynes credits Price with finding the story in the council agenda. Klebanow agrees to give the story space on the front page, and Price calls in having received a quote from Council President Nerese Campbell, and she also asks to speak to Haynes directly off the record. She tells him that the transaction is above board, but Gus questions the deal. After the conversation, he assigns Templeton to keep looking for more donations. Pleased with the story, Haynes takes his team to a bar. He congratulates Gutierrez on getting a quote from Hendricks, and Templeton tells her that he hopes to move on to the New York Times or the Washington Post, but she tells him that the Baltimore Sun is still a pretty good paper. The next day, the reporters are proud to see their work on the front page, and Templeton asks Haynes for the reaction piece on their story, and Haynes tells him that Price has it, but asks him to stay eager. Haynes again makes his afternoon appeal for budget lines on the stories from his reporters.
So I guess with that final scene there, we already have the establishment of this routine in the office that they're trying to show, the 2 p.m. budget lines.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're getting into the sort of the closing of this story that he's made here, and it's very, again, another very positive slant on Gus here, as he very generously credits Jeff Price with this story, kind of getting it from the City minutes, even though he kind of orchestrated that information. I can't imagine maybe Price wouldn't have done anything about it without Gus pressing him on it there. Or probably
if he
just
wasn't
hadn't
already
even noticed.
If he already wasn't this moral beacon, here's another way to show you how much of a great guy he is. A good guy, Greg, I guess. Just have this one.
Good guy Gus, you mean? But yeah,
good guy Gus.
He definitely is very generous there. And also is clever enough to deliver a bit of a lie to Campbell about the donations. I think it's nice that we kind of finish off with the papers on that lie as well. He kind of lies to her about the donations, about saying that they have more, and she doesn't deny it. So he uses that as an opportunity to go after it.
Mm. Oh, yeah.
He talks
Very,
about having
very
extras
accomplished
and
journalist.
inflating the figure that they have for the donations, and just uses that as an excuse to say, well, she's not saying no, then you'd think that they'd deny that if it weren't true. So let's see what else. Let's see how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Yeah, it's a really, really tense scene. It's a great scene, actually, with Nerese. And it's nice that she's getting a bit of a comeuppance this season.
Shame they couldn't use what she just gave them, or whatever it was.
Yeah, because she didn't admit, you have to get their consent, don't you, for it to be on the record.
That's right,
and,
yeah.
She's already given her quote. I think you can read the quote if you pause it on the paper, but we don't hear it specifically. Obviously, Klebanow's very pleased as well, although he's not quite going to admit it. He does offer up a smile and very sort of vacantly suggests that you should put it below the fold on the front page, which it ends up as. And yeah, it must be one of the only times I imagine we'll see him smiling this season.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of magnanimously offers them this this slot on the front page for their hard work.
Yeah. I mean, putting into perspective the whole Nerese Campbell deal, like, it's a huge story, because if he's netting $1 million from the city's budget here, that's 2% of the entire school deficit going to fat-face Rick in one fell swoop. Like, you really think about the severity of what that means. And
it also makes you question this supposed lack of money, and that maybe the money is just being misassigned. Perhaps
it's definitely the best piece of definitely the best piece of journalism we'll see this series, potentially, perhaps apart from the Bubs biopic thing at the end. But it makes you wonder, we assume Carcetti has no control over this aspect of the budget, like, that's kind of below his remit. Otherwise he'd probably be actively preventing all this crap. But it really shows you how sprawling the issues are.
Yeah, and we obviously get the next day. Sorry, no, I missed out the bar bit. I was going to say in the bar we get a little bit more of Templeton kind of just saying that he wants to go to a bigger paper, and again, sort of Alma is trying to encourage him about still being the Baltimore Sun, still being a pretty good paper. Although
she does kind of she does kind of reject him. She sort of goes over to the table and leaves Templeton to nurse his beer alone, doesn't she?
That's right, yeah. He's just kind of left to be a sour puss all by himself.
Not the happiest of men, but hey, he's got a career ahead of him, apparently.
And the next day, I think it's, again, another good move from Gus, as he... he's not gonna give him any kind of story. He tries to enforce this idea that the good stories come from people who go out and get them and go out and find them, actually do the investigation. We don't just give stories to people. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
The story has to happen with you finding out as it happens.
Yeah. And he takes that a bit too literally, doesn't he, when he tries to fabricate his own alongside McNulty.
Yeah, they come when they come, especially if you're the one making them happen.
Yeah. Okay, I guess we're on to, is it Bubbles, our final section?
Yep, final section now. Just one for Bubbles, kind of a quick rejoining of him at the start of this season, much further down the line. So we now have recovering drug addict Bubbles, who obviously we learn his full name for real here, Reginald Cousins. He sits quietly in his sister's basement, and when she has to go to work, she insists that he leave because he has betrayed her trust in the past by pawning her appliances while she was out. Bubbles asks to stay, but she refuses to change her rules. Bubbles spends the night walking the streets and finds, for example, one of his old associates, including his one-time scam partner, Hucklebuck. Bubbles returns home in the morning and then goes to work peddling the Baltimore Sun to commuters, and his customers include Nerese Campbell, who is livid to see the story on the front page.
Yeah, so how lovely it is to finally have Bubs fully humanised with his name being a known quantity.
Yeah.
Just as he is.
Because I think we learned his surname in Season 4.
His first name, I think it was Reginald.
Or was it just his first name that we learned?
Maybe it was Mr. Cousins.
I think it's his surname that we learn in Season 4.
Right.
And then we learn his first name here. We learn Reginald
yes,
here.
you're right. You are right. I'm sorry, yeah. So he's humanised as he comes back to the surface away from the drug world, sort of thing.
And it's nice that Bubbles doesn't react straight away either, in the sense that this name is called, and it's called out Reginald, and obviously it's implied that it's his name. That's obvious, but at the same time, it's kind of like enforcing that fact that we're suddenly learning his real name, that he doesn't react straight away either. It's sort of almost encouraging that response from the audience as well.
Yes, very good. And like Dookie, he's gained weight and is looking much healthier. He's obviously been clean since we last saw him almost 2 years ago. And we did see Bubs' sister back in Season 1, and I think Bubs' nephew as well, or potentially niece, when he did try and find a spot in the basement, and she denied him. So we're seeing that this is at least progress on this front. And it does seem a bit harsh that she doesn't let him upstairs, considering we know how warm-hearted Bubs is, but then she totally turns it on its head when she puts forward her side of the story, and you find it impossible to blame her. Like the whole pawning the kitchen appliances, yeah, fair enough, it makes sense. And so it's still pretty nice of her that she's decided he can stay on the premises. Bit of a raw deal. You wonder what their history is, if they are siblings. Really makes you wonder, as with many things.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not the first time that she's had to deal with this kind of thing, and being very forgiving of Bubbles, and he is fortunate to have this situation where he is able to go back into the basement. And, at least he's in a better position than he was, and this is the start of the long haul out of that hole that he caught himself up in at the end of Season 4.
Yeah.
And, of course, it's very difficult for him when he goes out onto the street because he's just surrounded by temptation.
Oh yeah, definitely. So he's even 15 months down the line, he's still sort of having to fight with these scars of the past that keep trying to draw him back in.
And of course, we complete that interconnectedness by not just, of course, the job that he's doing during the day is related to our new institution. He's obviously selling the Baltimore Sun, and it also connects us into the politics as well, and the way that this paper is getting involved in that, by pissing off Nerese Campbell by putting her story on the front page.
Yeah, it's really, really organic way to show us Nerese's reaction, like the violent cursing from behind the window from her Mercedes.
Of course, the first thing we see is that sort of dismissive wave, almost like a sort of royal wave.
Yeah.
For Bubbles.
Yeah, it's very good. We almost feel guilty because this is the moment that Gus and his crew really want to see. This is kind of their present to enjoy, but it's only us lot that get to see it from Bubbles' perspective.
Yeah.
So
yeah, sort of a reintroduction of Bubbles in a, still not the best, but a much better situation than he was.
Definitely. And of course, this is the scene where if you are wanting to read the whole story, you can pause the show and read the paper article as Nerys reads it.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's good that we've rejoined Bubbles at a point at which we can tell he is recovering, he's finding his way out, but it's also not easy for him. It's not just suddenly like, and now I'm on the road to recovery. It's still got a lot of hurdles to face.
Oh yeah, it's definitely really good to see that. Struggles are still there, and definitely Bubbles' best season. I'm looking forward to his arc in season 5.
Okay, so that's the end of the recap, at least. Anything else you want to say before we move on to our final sections?
Yeah, so just quickly in general says I think this is often considered to be one of the best episodes of this season, and that's perhaps largely because it's the only one that doesn't have anything to do with the manufactured homeless killings, which are introduced at the end of the next episode, because I know a lot of people just reject that.
Jimmy!
Can't wait. I really can't wait for that moment. It's so funny. I think it's a really strong opening episode, definitely up there with Boys of Summer as like the joint best opener.
It is very strong.
And really sets up the season, gives us a really sort of overarching view of the city, goes to a lot of places, and it helps a lot because it's the least bogged down of the premieres. There's no kind of getting to know people. It's very organically introduced to the Baltimore Sun, introduced to new characters quite easily. So yeah, I mean, they were working with time constraints this season, so the shortcomings on the lack of the development at the Baltimore Sun characters, the slightly forced nature of the cameos, which we'll be seeing this season, none of which are in this episode, but starting next episode, we're going to be seeing 1 or 2 of these slightly forced cameos each episode. And also the lack of spending time establishing real motives for McNulty and especially Freeman, perhaps. We'll have to discuss that in more depth later on. And Templeton as well. It's perhaps a byproduct of all this time constraint that we discussed earlier. But yeah, just overall, a really, really good episode.
Also, wanted to mention that despite how at the end of season 4 we can feel things slipping a little bit, and that we're not sort of fooled by this new day that comes out in the last quarter. When you take it all in, take a bit of a step back and look at the perspective in season 5, you realise how many gains from season 4 have been lost already. All of these ideas of these successes that were made have all sort of completely come back on themselves. I mean, even if you look at something like Herc, for example, obviously Herc is not a completely dislikable character, but I do feel like him being taken out of a position where he can, make any of those kind of decisions or have an impact on the world of policing or politics or crime or whatever, where his selfishness can get in the way. It feels like him being taken out of that and getting the disciplinary is, if just in one small example, things making a progression, a turn for the better. But that has been lost already because he's now back in a nice cushy job, and he's actually going to influence the procedures of the police and the investigations in an even greater effect than he did when he was ever in the police in the first place. Yeah. So like Carcetti with his new day is supposedly no longer making things about the stats. Literally, the first thing we hear him say is, "How are the stats?" It's so many things are just completely fallen back to the way that they used to be, and in some cases worse. But we should know that by now. This is The Wire. It's not there to provide us with some big happy ending. And at the end of season 4, there's more than enough evidence of the way that things are slipping, even slightly, in the following month or so after the election. And here we are, a year or more down the line. I guess it's just difficult in having to assume how much has happened in that period of time, what we haven't been shown.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's very much proving it's very the point it likes to make the most is that nothing is changing, and we're going to show you why using the media. But they've already told us why. I mean, it's in the epigraph, which we probably can discuss now. Actually, the epigraph explains exactly why things can't change.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to our final sections then.
Lie, lying motherfucker.
The machine is never wrong, son.
Fuck, man.
nigga can't never keep his damn mouth shut. I should have busted the cap and Pookie ass my own self. Left Marnell home and shit. He just a bitch is all.
The bigger the lie, the more they believe.
And take a look at the title. Take a look at the title first off, then More with Less. And like you say, primarily looking at the context of the show as it's being released in the sort of the big financial crisis, and you've got all the cutbacks and buyouts at the paper, and then you've got all of the other problems with the police department and their inability to pay their workers. We have the dealer who can't pay his workers. We have the co-op losing territory to this gentrification that's going on. What am I forgetting?
And obviously, pretty much, obviously, I mean, every institution is facing it apart from the Stanfields, but they still find a way, as you mentioned just there, to make that More with Less apply to the Stanfields when they try and starve out another dealer, just for their own ego, really, just because they can, as the monopoly.
Short yourself, short someone else. Whatever you do, don't take our split.
Yeah, exactly. So very self-centered and a very all-encompassing title, more so than most, and a nice contradictory message within the title. Obviously, those recession connotations you mentioned, and it just sets up the season perfectly. We ain't got no money, so here's what's going to happen.
Asking for the impossible, essentially. I mean, the whole reason why they were able to do those certain things is because they had those particular resources. I mean, we've seen, for example, with the detail as a microcosm of this, when they have these resources afforded to them by, say, Jimmy getting it through Fitzhugh and getting this particular technology to enhance their case, they're able to make the progress that they do because of those advantages. You take that away from them, you can't expect them to suddenly be able to do the same kind of investigative work. It's just a complete nonsense from the outset.
Oh, yeah.
In the same way that with the news, it's all very well and good them having all of these supposed resources and whatnot, but they can't cover these transport issues if they don't actually have a transport reporter. So it doesn't matter what Klebanow says about the quality of their journalism, they've either got it or they don't.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. All right. Epigraph. So that's the bigger the lie, the more they believe. So spoken by Bunk. I think the second and the only other time it's spoken before it's actually appearing in the credits.
That's right, yeah.
It's in the cold open. And an obvious one that's, as I mentioned before, sort of summarises the point made this whole season and why none of these systemic issues that we've been shown can be fixed, because the people will always see things at face value and revolt. So...
you mentioned that it also only appears one more. This is only the second time that the epigraph appears before it's actually shown after the titles. And the other example is from Time After Time.
Yeah.
That's the first episode of season 3. And interestingly enough, the epigraph is don't matter how many times you get burnt, you just keep doing the same, from Bodhi, which is very much kind of like in tune with our post New Day idea. It doesn't matter how many times you get told that it's going to be change and it's a new day. The same stuff keeps happening.
Yeah, so they are very much linked in that respect, definitely.
Right. So we sometimes look at favourite scenes and favourite characters. Do you feel like having a stab at that for this episode, or I think this whole section is kind of a bit redundant by this point?
No, I mean, just to mention a couple of scenes, I guess, that really stood out. The Bond, Daniels and Carcetti moment was good, where you get the classic Daniels quote about the 22 dead bodies being trumped by the thieving politician. The introduction to the newsroom, really good, and we're very excited at this stage to learn more about all the new characters. And then, of course, the Marlowe co-op uncomfortable scenes and the physical detail action at the start, I think, are the sort of the highlights for me. But as you say, that could probably be expanded to the whole episode, because every scene is just very consistently solid.
Gus certainly comes off very, very well in this opening episode. It's quite the introduction.
Oh yeah, he's so much presence to that character, definitely. And yeah, certainly we're looking forward to seeing more of him. So we've gone on quite a long time this episode, haven't we? We've gone for a nice 2.5 hour.
Yeah, well, I think it's
bumper.
only fair that because we took a bit of time to talk about the season as a whole at the beginning.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's only fair that we've taken a bit of a bumper look at our first and final season. So is there anything else you want to cover in Season 5, Episode 1?
No, I think we'll just hold our breaths for next week for our unconfirmed reports.
Right, well, so we start jumping into our sort of major point next episode with our fake serial killer, obviously a very divisive storyline. We'll look at that more detail then. But until next week, just to let you know, before we go, as per usual, we will be taking off all of the Season 4 episodes just before the second episode goes up. So the first episode will go up and all of the other Season 4 episodes will still be there until next Friday. So it'll be the 4th of December will be when all the Season 4 episodes will be coming down. Obviously, they will still be available on our website. There's a download link for all of the episodes on the website at caughtonthewire.wordpress.com. And you can watch all of the episodes on. I say watch. I mean, there's an image, but you can listen to all of the episodes on YouTube as well. So the episodes themselves are not going anywhere. They're still available. It's just not going to be on the iTunes for all the bandwidth issues that we've mentioned before. So thanks very much for joining us again. Feel free to send us any emails, any of your thoughts on Season 5 in anticipation, and fire them over to us at caughtonthewire@gmail.com. And until next week, thanks very much.